Hello again, friends! And you are our friends, and welcome back to another happy edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here. It's the holiday time. Hopefully you're at home. If you're at work, it's like a half day and everyone's drunk. But we are here with the Drive Thru. We're going to have a lot of fun today. We've already been having a lot of fun just attempting to do some other things off air that have failed miserably. But I'm your host, the great Brian Last, and the man who will be answering your questions. And we'll be trying to find a way to get through an entire show with your content, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Ho, ho, hopefully, ho, 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 that we'll do this whole show in quicker time than it took us to do something just a few minutes ago. If the blooper reel is getting bigger, is all we've got to say with this fine program. This is your show, Brian Last, the Drive Thru. Because since I last spoke to you on the experience, nothing's happened for once in the world of wrestling. I don't know if anybody's done anything stupid, at least in the last 2.5 days, is what I'm saying. That may be they've got on the wall in the workplaces, such and such days without a job related accident. They ought to have something up on the wall of wrestling somewhere, such and such days without anybody doing or saying anything stupid. They wouldn't need a lot of numbers.
No, not a lot.
But unfortunately for our content today, they have gone 2.5 days without really being egregiously noteworthy. And also, I'll have you know, attempted and succeeded for much of it to email all of the Cornette's Collectibles customers in Australia and New Zealand that we were talking about, and they've been very understanding about the mail situation, and I've clarified some addresses and some order issues with some people. And then I tried yesterday and spent several hours doing so. You know, we got the brand new JimCornette.com website that Hotchkiss worked all of his 11 fingers to the bone, even the 2 that had to be reattached after the first site failed. But he worked it up and he's got it up there, and now people can, and it doesn't crash, and it's just shiny and marvelous. And people can contact me through the contact form on the website. It goes to my email there. But the 2 things. Number one, since I've been filling merchandise orders for the last 2.5 months, I haven't had a lot of time to read emails. And 2, there's this little bug in it that before, when people sent me an email through my previous website that was a piece of shit, but the one thing about it was they could put like the subject and you would see what they were talking about and you know, potential who it was from. But now what I get, I don't know if I've told you this, Brian. I don't know if you've gone to sleep already, because this is the most exciting conversation I've got right now. All the emails say is from Jim Cornette, and the subject is Jim Cornette contact form. In the last 8 or 10 weeks, I've gotten probably about 1,000 or 1,200 of and all the emails almost exactly, until you click on them, you cannot tell one from another. So I tried to start clicking yesterday, and after a couple hours and my eyes were bleeding, I'd got through about 20% of them. So it's going to be an ongoing work. That's not answering them now. Bear in mind, that's just actually reading it and determining it that none of them are Nigerian princesses that are going to give me $6 million for helping smuggle them into the country. Something that I could retire on. It's just seeing what it is and printing it out. I do have a few things that I've printed out so far, but I'm trying to save some of these for the experience where I've got a compendium of them and can determine the best things to acknowledge on the air. But that's what I've been doing. So that's been thrilling. But I know this is your show, but I have a correction on something that we've said earlier on one of the programs. I can't remember which one it was because we've done so many of these things. Where did we talk about Tony Khan firing back at Fox News for their not even really uncomplimentary article, just the article that they did mentioning that AEW's ratings had cooled off over the last few months? And he
Well,
fired back at him on Twitter. When did we talk about that?
We talked about it on the experience, but I think also the bigger picture was it tied AEW's ratings into an overall picture of the family having issues with various businesses right now. I think that may have been the more sensitive topic of it.
Struck a nerve, as Dennis Condrey would say. But as I mentioned to you when you had first said, did you see the Tony Khan fired back at Fox News? He basically sent back these charts of figures because he's a statistics fellow, is Tony. And he sent all these charts of all these statistics.
A statistics fellow.
A statistics fellow, as opposed to a fishmonger and a meat gentleman. And then you have the statistics fellow. And I told you at the time that we were going to talk about it, I said, I saw what he said in that, well, our program for the last however many weeks has outrated any of your programs. And I said, and that was good. And I said, way to fire back, Tony. You're getting some balls there, right? Because if somebody knocks you and you can say, well, more people watch me than watch you, well, then that's a good way to get back at them. And I said that he had sent all these statistics, which on the Twitter machine, even if you click on them, I'd have needed a microscope to read all this shit, right? But the overall meaning was that, well, good for Tony, right? Guess what I found out? He was lying.
What?
His AEW has not beaten the Fox News programming. And also, I was heartened. I was optimistic that people were finally seeing through Fox News' bullshit, right? And weren't watching the program anymore. But come to find out, neither one of those is the case. Tony was lying, and more people are still watching the Fox News programs. Tucker Carlson, that bow-tied, bloviating bag of bullshit, gets 3.5 million viewers every night.
He dropped the bow tie a few years back. It was hurting that gimmick was hurting his bigger gimmick.
I don't think he has a bigger gimmick. The bow tie was probably cutting off the oxygen to his brain when his mother tied it too tight in 4th grade and he never untied it. But Tony was saying that AEW was winning the ratings in the, can we all say it together? Key demo. There's many more people watching the Fox News programs even than watching AEW. This comes from Ron. I won't give his last name. It's got one of those little dravas over the E, so I don't really know how to pronounce it anyway. But he says, Jim, Brian, one thing you overlooked when discussing the story of Tony and his microscopic ratings charts, not microscopic ratings, but the charts, is that Tucker Carlson gets 3.5 million viewers every night. Tony's point about AEW winning in the ratings was based entirely on the key demo, not overall audience. He just didn't clap back. He didn't just clap back with stats and info. He clapped back with heavily skewed and somewhat irrelevant stats. So basically, that's like saying, well, more people in Pittsburgh that like to eat fish were watching my program than yours.
Well, what he could have said is, more people who don't need a walker watch my show by far compared to your shows.
Well, or more people.
More advertisers pay attention to my show than your shows. That would have been legitimate. More
people that don't need a brain transplant probably watch Fox News. But still, when you're having to shave the cornet down that close to the cob, it wasn't a blow-away comeback like we thought it was.
Well, Fox News is looking to respond. I heard they're trying to sign Orange Cassidy right now for a primetime show. We'll see what happens.
He would probably be more, all the rest of them stick their hands in their pockets and play with themselves on Fox News anyway, so he'd fit right in that respect. But that's... Oh, and also, would you like me to bring up some more clarification on your ignorance?
Yeah, please. Let me hear this.
Well, the other day when we were talking, when did you mention Ottawa and weren't sure whether it was a city or not?
I think it's a city, right? Ottawa's a city.
Yeah, God damn it. It's the cap.
I know.
I know that. But people took you to task for like, he doesn't know Ottawa. You were being somewhat facetious in that remark, right?
And not one person picked up on it, so I did a great job, obviously.
You did a wonderful job. We were discussing the various Canadian provinces that I had worked in. I think the way it came up was I said Winnipeg is Canada's Kansas City.
No, I don't think it was that.
And went from there. What was it?
I think we were talking about a dunce in Canada who's in Ottawa, wasn't it?
Oh, well, yeah, that he is Canadian, but he's in, I don't know where he is, whether he's in Greece or just hot water or where he's at. But anyway, we were talking about the Canadian provinces.
Yes.
That's where, and you...
We talked about states and provinces.
Yes, states and provinces. And you, in a smart-ass fashion, mentioned that, well, I guess Ottawa's a city. It is the capital city, by the way. But anyway.
No, that's how it came up. He sued the city of Ottawa.
Oh, he sued the city, that's right.
Because he lost his job as a part-time gym attendant, which was, I think, the exact term as it was in the article that I read.
I thought that guy from Penn State was a part-time gym attendant, too.
I'm going to stay away from comparing anyone to Jerry Sandusky until I have evidence.
You're like that one fucking South Park episode where they were doing some really over the top shit and Stan and Kyle just walked in every once in a while and said, yeah, we're going to stay away from this one, and just kept on walking. Anyway.
What is a part-time gym attendant? I mean, I'm not trying to even make a joke. Is that like the person who like hands out towels and
that's a person who's trying to train to be a full-time gym attendant. I guess it's like a part-time jizz mopper at the porno store. You got to train under the full-time experienced guy and prove that you can mop up all the jizz before you get the head job. And then once you've got the head job, the rest is easy.
I don't know if it's that, because I ran a fitness center years ago in Long Island, and I ran the sales department, broke every sales record, by the way. And sometimes you only have small shifts. So it could be the opposite. It could be that they have all the gym attendants they need, but there are certain shifts that you need to fill, and that could be a part-time. We never called them gym attendants. That's why I don't know exactly what he does. Does he take care of the sauna? I don't know what he does.
It's like garbage men got offended when they were called garbage men, so now they're maintenance supervisors or refuse disposal experts. He's carries somebody else's jock straps is what he does, but that gym attendant sounds better than jock carrier.
So you're saying Ottawa's a city?
Ottawa is a city, believe it or not, but I have an email.
I thought the capital of Canada was Montreal. Or at least that's what everyone I know, that's what Bertrand tells me.
Hold on now. Well, I'm going to apply some Canadian logic to this here, because Brandon from a small town just outside Vancouver has written in to clarify our various comparisons of the Canadian provinces and parts of the country and areas and etc. He says, I heard you discuss Canadian provinces on the latest episode of The Experience. That's where it was. I'm from a small town just outside Vancouver, and I have to correct you on some of the facts about major Canadian cities. Vancouver is home to the best marijuana in the entire country and possibly North America. Calgary, if you don't mind freezing your tits off in May and June when it decides to snow, you'll be fine. Winnipeg has the highest murder rate in the entire country. You have a better chance of getting shot in the street than getting bit by snapping cobra chicken, which is a Canadian goose. And I thought they had decent gun laws. Well, Winnipeg isn't that far from the United States. They probably got a bunch of guns up there because we're like Typhoid Mary. We're not only carriers, but also we spread the things around. Toronto, he says, is the New York City of Canada. I believe I've said that. And he says, let Brian fill you in on that. But I've noticed that already.
I could talk a little more about Montreal than Toronto.
Well, here we go now. All of Quebec. Who cares? The rest of Canada hates them as well as everyone else.
You know what? Go have a couple late nights in Montreal. You'll love them. You'll love them for the rest of your life. What a wonderful city Montreal is. You could stay up all night. It's like New York. It's the city that reminds me the most of what you could do in New York of any city I've been to. Where just What?
That first statement that you made, though, sounded like a passage from Bret Hart's autobiography. Just a few Montreal nights. You'll remember them for the rest of the romanticist. You sounded like Hemingway there.
No, honestly, I had so many. There was one night there. I'll just say one brief story, and I'm not going to go too far, but now it's on my mind. There was one night there where me and my cousin and a friend of ours were hanging out, and we met a couple guys who said they can get us all the weed we needed. And I ran with one of the guys into a strip club while my cousin, who was bombed, was hanging out with our other friend and that other guy's friend. It was kind of like, you stay here with him and I'll go with him. Me and the guy I'm with, we're having a great time. We're talking. We grab a drink. I get the drugs. We leave. Say hello to a few girls. By the time we get back, my cousin who's bombed is fighting with this guy in the fucking street. And we have to pull them apart. And we said goodbye, and it was a wonderful night. Then it continued from there. That was Jazz Fest. We missed Bobby McFerrin, which is one of the biggest disappointments of my life. Because I wanted to see how he did all that. I wanted to see how he did that shit live. I wanted to see him do it live.
I don't have a record scratch sound, but wait. You missed Bobby McFerrin, and it was one of the biggest regrets of your life.
I wanted to see how he was going to do all the noises and shit he does, or whatever he fucking does. Because he doesn't do Don't Worry, Be Happy. Apparently the one song that everyone knows he refuses to do.
What? That's the only thing that I'd want to see him fucking do.
That's why he's at Jazz Fest, because his weird bodily sounds is considered jazz.
Weird bodily. Well, that's not Stevie Ray Vaughan. That's Steamy Ray Vaughan. Stevie Ray Vaughan was a blues guitarist. Steamy Ray Vaughan just shits his britches. Well, that's not Stevie Nicks. That's Steamy Nicks. Stevie Nicks was the girl that sang Landslide. Steamy Nicks just gets up there and shits her britches.
What is this material you're doing here?
Obviously from a show you don't watch. And also, let's back up to, so you're in a foreign country.
Yes.
You and several of your cohorts, and you meet people for the very first time that indicate to you, if you follow them into the red light district, into an unsavory neighborhood, that they will get you all the drugs that you desire. And you do this, and you have no thought that potentially you might end up floating down the river in a body bag somewhere.
No.
Which apparently one of your cohorts out in the parking lot was headed in that direction.
That wasn't a parking lot. That was the middle of the street. Whatever it was. Rue de Saint Laurent. It was right in the middle of the fucking street. They're having a fist fight at 2 a.m. It was the greatest thing ever. And that was just the start. That was just the start. I swear to God, my cousin jumped. I can't believe he did this, and thank God he lived. He jumped from one balcony to another that night. Escaping and angry. I don't know if it's technically a pimp or the pimp's muscle, but it was the greatest fucking night. And I've had so many great nights in Montreal, and I'm not worried about any of that shit. I meet people everywhere I go. People like me, and I get things done. That's the way it works.
People like me, and I get things done. Well, in that case, Quebec is for you, but not for Brandon here. And he also goes on to mention the smaller territories and areas, Newfoundland. If anyone can understand what they're fucking saying, I'll keep you posted on what they're like. New Brunswick is nothing more than a little butt plug south of Ontario. Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island are just the lucky asshole who aren't connected, kind of like Hawaii. And all 3 territories, it's the fucking North Pole in capital letters. So there we have the rundown, along with your personal recollections of unsavory and illegal activities in a foreign country. Brian, if I wouldn't try to cross any state lines, or definitely don't go through customs after this podcast comes out.
You should see the shit we pulled in Boston. I mean, I'll tell you, one day the adventures of the great Brian Last will be told, but I've had some good times.
Yeah. One day they'll be told. And then a day or two later, somebody will listen. Real quick, The folks at Spectrum, I noticed that there were, and I'm going to have so many emails coming up over the next number of weeks. A lot of the recent emails were about our friends at Spectrum. And I just real quickly here from Corey, longtime listener. Hey, Jim and Brian, wanted to add to the giant pile of monkey shit that is Spectrum. A friend of mine had their house burned down, and Spectrum charged their card $600 for the equipment that was destroyed. What pieces of shit. Nothing like making a tragic situation even worse by taking the last pennies this family had after this tragic event. Hope the company goes under and takes their bullshit equipment with them. So now they're preying on people who have lost all their worldly possessions in disasters. Spectrum, do not use them for any services like the unfortunate ones of us who are stuck with their garbage. But this is your program.
That's right. And by the way,
you know, I did have one email here.
You had one email. I heard a whole bunch of emails before, so I'm a little worried.
Well, I'm getting through them slowly, but we talked about the Adam Page and Bryan Danielson match recently on AEW, the best AEW World Championship match that they've held. Not that those two guys, but that the company has held. And it was a classic, and that Danielson's a genius, and all these many praiseworthy things we said. But we'd said, who would have thought, because they've hidden Page in tag team matches with Harpo as his partner, and the multi-man matches on a football field, and he's chasing people on a horse, and the goofy interviews with the Dork Order and the lawnmowers. But when he got an interview that was all about himself and could feature him talking about him in the ring that time several weeks ago, he sounded like he knew what the fuck he was doing, had some balls for once. And in this match, yes, he's being led by the more experienced guy, but not hard. I don't know too many other people, not only on the AEW roster, but in the business, that could have done that well, being led for that long. So we said, you know, if we could have seen this guy from the start, maybe it would have been more appealing. But I got an alternate viewpoint on Hangman Adam Page from a quadrant that I've never would have thought in a million years, and it makes perfect sense now that they've chimed in. Would you like to hear this?
Yeah, I'm very curious about this.
Got an email, like to hear it. Here it goes. This is from Brett. And Brett says, hi, Jim. He said nothing about you, Brian, so apparently he doesn't really rate you, as they say over across the pond. Hi, Jim. I love your insight on the wrestling business. Appreciate the opportunity to get to write you. The ratings for Hangman's first title defense are in and are obviously disappointing. Disappointing, I don't know. They got to over 1 million during that match. They just ran them off afterwards with the Hartley Boys. But anyway, he continues. The reason to me is quite simple. The guy is playing dress up as a cowboy, and the entire world can see it. I myself am a cowboy. I race horses. I work on a farm. I understand the lifestyle. Originally, I was all for this guy, as you can imagine. Sadly, the first warning sign for me was when he made the company jam the brakes on his push to the top due to the birth of his child. I know.
Oh, come on.
Well, wait a minute. I know I'm a monster for saying that, but it is true. I'm all for people taking time off for that thing, but not when you pretend to be a cowboy on TV. Real cowboys, I'm telling you, they find a way to persevere with next to no live events. I think he could have found a way to make an earlier run as champion happen, especially when the moment was piping hot, but I digress. Now let's stop down for a second here. And I said the same thing. Yes, if it was a territory schedule or Crockett schedule or old-time WWF road schedule, you're not home for 2-3 weeks at a time. Yes, but they were only working 1 day a week to begin with, and this was one pay-per-view that you could have bopped in and out for and sent in video for the previous month or whatever, so it wasn't like he was on a burdensome schedule. But this is Bret's opinion here, and he qualified it. I know, I'm a monster for saying that, but it's true. Most everybody else in the business and most everybody else in previous generations that had a job that depended on their appearing at some place would have got there somehow for that. However, and I don't have the entire family tree to go back on, but if that had happened, then and Moxley hadn't gone to rehab, then we might not have ended up getting this match, so maybe it worked out better in the end. Because Twinkle Toes is off and out of the picture. Danielson is having the best matches on television. We don't have to watch Moxley do the same thing every week. So maybe this might have been better for Page, too. But anyway, he continues. And this is where it gets deep now, folks. The real moment when he exposed himself as a fraud was when he had the audacity to make a cowboy shit day. Or not make one, but I guess name one. He named a certain day. This is cowboy shit day, right? In the same message where he purchases a Tesla and says trucks are bad for the environment. Newsflash, numbnuts. Real cowboy shit requires a truck. Have you ever hauled 30 bales of hay to feed your horses? How did you get those horses into downtown Minneapolis for your little riding vignette? And how about when you need to move tack, equipment, and other important farm material? That moment sealed it. Sure, he's just pretending to be a cowboy like actors in Hollywood pretend. But here's the difference. John Wayne never gave the finger to real cowboys while he was starring in Westerns. And that's the difference. So this phony piece of crap, in my opinion, can hit the road.
Jesus.
He spits in the face of every real cowboy and is a disgrace to that belt. Actually, he's from a small town in Virginia. So he's not really a cowboy anyway.
Yeah, he's a school teacher from Virginia. Obviously, he's playing a character.
Well, he's a hillbilly.
He's from Virginia.
Yeah, they have cowboys out west in Texas. They have hillbillies up. I'm not talking about Arlington, Virginia. I'm not talking about suburban Washington, D.C. I'm talking about western Virginia, out around Clinchco and Hayside and all those types of places. There's a few hillbillies up there, boy.
I'd also like to say the job of cowboy sounds like it sucks.
What?
You don't get time off. You have to ride around. You have to do lots of shit. I don't know.
Hey, that's why I decided not to become a cowboy.
I'd rather be a school teacher in Virginia, to be quite honest. That sounds more pleasing.
you get a lot of blisters on your ass too from them saddles. And bow-legged.
Yeah.
And hanging around the campfire, farting at each other when you eat beans. You know, that's the biggest thing is a... Oh, wait, hit the wrong button. See, that one of those. But actually, one of those does lead to... Either that or it leads to... Or possibly even... But this is your program.
God help us. Yeah, let's move on with this program.
Oh, I got a couple of things to mention.
Please.
Just real quick. Frank Culbertson sent me a book by the illustrious Mike Rogers. Mike Rogers of Ring Around the Northwest has been a faithful Northwest, Portland area, Northwest United States wrestling fan since the 70s and did Ring Around the Northwest. He conducted a series of interviews with a lot of the stars that came through the Northwest over the years for his newsletter and afterwards, etc., and reunions, and they've compiled them in a book. John Cosper of Eat, Sleep, Wrestle has printed the book. Frank Culbertson has edited it. Mike Rogers did the interviews, and it's called Excitement in the Air, The Voices of Northwest Wrestling. And Bull Ramus, Dutch Savage, Lou Thez, Killer Brooks, Red Bastien, Stan Stasiak. I'm just reading some of these names. Tom Pritchard, Donnelly O'Jonathan, Ricky Hunter, Roger Kirby, Luke Williams, Pampiro Fuppo, Deviled Bull of the Pampas, and etc. With a foreword by Moondog Moretti. He sent me that, and it's wonderful.
Did you subscribe to Ring Around Northwest? Because I did.
I did years ago, yes.
It was the best because even when Portland wrestling was it wasn't exciting. There wasn't a lot of things that people were looking to trade for videos of or anything. It wasn't even TV, actually. But reading about the battles with the commission, like Mike Rogers was all over everything. And that is the guy who lived it. I mean, he was documenting everything in Ring Around the Northwest, and he did such a great job with it. And everyone should check out this book because he's someone who has always been really serious about documenting history as it happened. So this is a great collection here.
And it's eatsleepwrestle.com is John Cosper's site. And also Sean Delaney of the 400 Court Street podcast. That is the address of the Evansville, Indiana Coliseum, 400 Court Street. And Sean is a fan over there in the Evansville area that has been researching, does the podcast and has been researching some of the history of Evansville in the newspapers and et cetera. And it's a small book, but I loved it. It's the history of pro wrestling in Evansville in 1959. Because in those days, not only were all of the cards printed in the paper, but they did articles on the events in the paper and listed the results. You know, it was treated like a local sporting event. So you would be able to go back in those days. That's the primary source of information, since the wrestling people didn't keep any of their shit, is the newspapers. And the one thing that because I had not researched a lot of Evansville history that far back. And Leon Balkan was the promoter then. And it was a deal much like St. Louis, where Sam Muchnick was the promoter of St. Louis, but he didn't have a territory. Evansville was not part of a territory. Leon Balkan had been the promoter for like 15 years, and he brought talent in from not only the St. Louis office, but also the Nashville office with Nick Goulas and Roy Welch, and then did some of his own things as well, and ran his town his own way. And it was business was apparently on its ass for a number of years in the 50s, but then 1959 started a boom period. And the reason why, do you know who the top star in Evansville, Indiana in 1959 was? Great Brian Last, and who basically kind of like did a Sputnik Monroe in Memphis thing and revitalized the town to where they went from drawing in the hundreds of people in the Coliseum to selling out the Coliseum and actually running the bigger building, Roberts Stadium, a time or two during the course of the year.
59?
Yes.
Was he also working other cities?
Well, yes, he didn't just work one day a goddamn
Right, he wasn't
week,
just working there. Okay, so it wasn't just like some local boy that all of a sudden was selling out. Okay.
No, you've heard of this person, but at the same time, I don't particularly know what he was doing elsewhere in the business at that time.
It wasn't Ray Stevens, right?
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't him. Wouldn't be Shire. I'm just trying to think who would be in the area. Is it someone from the general Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky area?
Well, they wrestled there many times, but they weren't spawned or inseminated or given birth to in that location.
Give me another clue that would make it so I could actually find someone.
Well, his friend Swede liked him.
Oh, Rip Hawk.
Rip Hawk.
Really? Wow.
You are correct, sir. Rip Hawk did kind of like a Sputnik Monroe type of thing in Memphis, where he came in and he had been working Indianapolis for Barnett, and he had seen Roy Shire and Ray Stevens, but he was a bleached blonde, braggadocious, big promo guy. They had television, and things popped, and he got a couple of shots against Pat O'Connor, the NWA title, blah, blah, blah. But it's a nice little recap just of 1 year in Evansville history. And that, I don't even know how you order it. But look up Sean Delaney and the 400 Court Street podcast series. But yeah, when I used to go to Evansville in 77, 78, 79, 80, you would always hear people say, oh, the old days of, Fargo and Tojo and Jerry, which was the early 70s. And like in Louisville, people would talk about Luthez because he wrestled here from the time he was almost a rookie through the 60s in Louisville. And they would talk about, the old timers like Roy Welch and Herb Welch. But in Evansville, people wouldn't even mention Lou Thez. They would talk about Rip Hawk. And I thought, well, that's odd. Of any town in this territory, nobody else talks about Rip Hawk. And then, years later, I found out he had a run there, but this book brought it into focus as how he had a big part in turning the business around. So 20 years later, if you asked, that's why I love the territories, because if you ask somebody in 1980 that was 50 years old, you say, name a great wrestler from your childhood. Everybody in every city had a different fucking answer. And in the other cities, some of those people, they might not even ever have heard of before. But now we got what we got. And is anybody going to remember him in 30 years?
When I first got into wrestling in 89, when I first really got into wrestling, I was conscious of it because of the cartoon and all that shit when I was a kid. But my dad, he remembered Bruno Sammartino, Killer Kowalski, Gorilla Monsoon. Like, those were the names in the Northeast that if you weren't a wrestling fan, but just every now and then saw it, those names stayed with you. He also remembered Gordo Chihuahua, but the other three were main eventers and Hall of Famers.
And then there was Gordo. I mean, the same thing. My cousins, when I was a little kid and used to go visit my Aunt Lola and Uncle Tommy up in Cincinnati, my cousin Richard never liked wrestling and never watched it on purpose. I mean, there was 3 channels when he was a kid in Cincinnati. So if TV was on, there might be a chance he would have peripherally known about it. But from going to school and existing in the city, you knew the names, The Sheik, Bobo Brazil, Haystacks Calhoun, and a couple of other people like that, just like you would know, even if you'd never been to a local game or basketball game of your local university or whatever, you know some of the players because they're mentioned on the news. They're talked about in the newspaper. You can't get away from it. You can easily get away from professional wrestling now if you don't get on the internet and or search it out. You can get as far the fuck away from it as ever before. But in those days, you couldn't. If you went to school, you were hearing about the fucking wrestlers in that town.
I'm going to ask a question right now, Jim, talking about your youth, and I want to say to anyone right now listening with kids, maybe don't let them listen to this segment. It's a little sensitive for young ears. But
now, where are you going now after you've talked about your debauchery and all of the whores that you hung out with in Montreal? You were like Jean Ferret. When he hung out,
I'm like Jean Ferret, really?
In the red light section in Montreal there because he enjoyed the company of the ladies.
I think it was literally the exact same area he would have been in, so that makes sense. But Jim, this question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Blake Williamson. Hello, Mr. Cornette and Mr. Last. Coming to you again from the great city of Richmond, Kentucky. As a fun question for the holidays.
Richmond also is the closest cookout location to me. The restaurant, the fast food place, Cookout. That's the closest one.
I don't know that. That's a chain?
Yeah, yes, it's, oh, for heaven's sake. You people up there in the Northeast are so deprived. Cookout is a chain. They started in the Carolinas, and every time I'd go to like the Charlotte Fan Fest, that would be because they're open till 4 a.m. They have the fastest drive-through in history. Cheeseburgers and Cajun fries and hot dogs and gourmet milkshakes, 30-something different flavors and blah, blah, blah. You're missing out.
Does the fastest drive-through make you happy or concern you? I mean, they're just shitting out burgers at that point if they're just throwing them out the thing.
But they're good, unless I will say that some of the cookouts, since they've been spreading, they've spread from the Carolinas. Now, like I said, there's one in Kentucky. You see there's a few in Tennessee. The ones that are farther away from the core area sometimes are not as good because those people have not grown up eating that food, so they're not as well versed in it, but I'm hoping they'll catch up. But no, it's shockingly and magically fast is what it is. But there's always a line because especially after midnight, that's one of the only places to eat, but they get through it quickly. It's amazing.
Well, let's go back to Richmond, Kentucky. I would like to ask Mr. Cornette if he recalls when he found out the big guy, Mr. Santa Claus, was indeed fictitious. That's why I said it was sensitive for the children out there listening.
Well, I have a feeling that if there's children listening to this program, they've probably already been desensitized to stuff like that, and they're being sensitized to something else. It wasn't a revelation, like nobody told me and I cried about it. It's just that, as you get a little older, you start picking up on things that you wouldn't have picked up on when you were a kid. And then also you get to watch a few more of the TV shows that make jokes about don't tell, little Junior McGillicuddy there that there's no Santa Claus. And you kind of figure there was no aha moment. Just like with wrestling, you kind of start seeing things. And if you pay attention and you're up close, I'm not talking about just the general aspect of, well, they're not really mad. I'm talking about how things work and etc. If you pay attention, it slowly begins to make itself clear. So there was no big, oh my God. But I'll tell you one thing. This motherfucker last week tried to tell me that the tooth fairy was bullshit. And there's no way that's possible, because how the fuck would anybody else have known I had that quarter under my pillow that time I swallowed my tooth in my sleep and didn't tell anybody? But there was still a quarter there. How would that have happened? I know it was one of my front teeth, but at the same time, I didn't think anybody was going to notice.
Well, Jim, that sounds like a serious issue, maybe one that you could talk to someone about, and luckily you have a quarter, so you can put it right into that phone. Do they still have payphones? Imagine we are in a world with payphones, and you could take that quarter and you can call someone for some help.
You can take that quarter and call somebody that cares. No, what you could actually, and that's another thing. What happens if somebody is, let's say, abducted in a carjacking? You're asleep, you've pulled over, and you're asleep in the back of your car because you're just tired on your drive, and somebody jumps in and steals your car and takes off down the interstate. Now they see that you're in the back seat, right? And they immediately pull over to the side and pull you out and begin slapping you about the head and face. Well, they can't let you loose with a cell phone, so they throw your cell phone in the creek. And they can't let you loose with any money, because since they've gone this far, they might as well take your money. And then you're out on the side of the road. If you can get to some place and turn them in, you're going to. So they're going to take your shoes so that you can't get anywhere very quick. And they're going to drive off in your car. Now what you are is some poor, miserable, put-upon motherfucker that's limping down the side of the road in the gravel emergency lane with no shoes on, barefoot, with just, if they've left you your pants and your shirt, you got no money and no phone and no wallet. Well, who's going to let you have their cell phone? Nobody. That's where a payphone comes in. Because if you can merely beg a quarter and drop it in that payphone, you could call the police. But otherwise, you're just going to be a barefoot, sore-footed, broke, no car, hanging out on the side of the highway motherfucker, because there ain't no payphones anymore. Now, if that happens to you, ladies and gentlemen, you've got problems, and if you've got problems, you need to call the folks at BetterHelp. Now, there's a transition for you, Brian.
Oh boy, is that a transition?
The folks at BetterHelp can help you because it's something interfering with your happiness, like getting carjacked, left on the side of the road, or preventing you from achieving your goals, such as getting to Christmas dinner, but you ain't got no car. Or whatever the case, BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist, and you can start communicating in under 48 hours. It's professional counseling done securely online with a broad range of expertise available, which may not even be available locally in many of your areas, especially in the wilds of southern North Dakota and the Appalachian part of northern North Dakota. The service is available for clients worldwide, though, not just in the Dakotas. It's all of the country and the globe as we know it today. You can log into around the globe. If you can be reached with an internet signal or, one of those fan boats that Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn used in The African Queen, if they can get to you, they'll service you. You can log into your account anytime, unless you have Spectrum Internet, in which case it might be questionable. Send messages to your counselors and get timely and thoughtful responses. Schedule weekly video or phone sessions. Whatever the case, BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches. And it's more affordable than traditional offline counseling because they want you to start living a happier life today. You can go to the website and read the testimonials that are posted daily. Go to BetterHelp, BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/drive and get 10% off your first month's services. Join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional and stay away from being carjacked. BetterHelp.com/drive, 10% off your first month's services.
Well, Jim, we better help the listeners right now and get some questions here on the show. Questions and quips.
It was only as fun for them as it is for us.
That's right.
On the things that we're not recording. Go ahead.
Well, let's get some questions and quips. I can't even say it.
Questions and quips.
Well, if they only know what just happened off air, it would be even funnier. All right. Here's a question.
Contagious, ladies and gentlemen. The Baba Wawa variant of COVID has come to Brian Last and Jim Cornette. Now we're having comments and quips.
This next question is sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Steve in Sackville, New Brunswick.
And wait a minute, I got to check. Hold on. Where's my Canadian province thing? New Brunswick, nothing more than a little butt plug south of Ontario. Go ahead. What was his name?
Steve.
Steve from Butt Plug. Go ahead.
From Sackville, New Brunswick. Huge fan of the show.
Not anymore.
The other night, Bret Hart was on CBC Radio's Q podcast, and when he was asked about the Vince McMahon steroid scandal, he offered his thoughts on why he was picked in 1992 to be world champ. Bret Hart believes McMahon was fearful of losing the case and being sent to jail. He feels that's at least part of the reason he became WWF champion. Here's the quote. Vince McMahon, I think, was worried that he might actually go to jail over that stuff. He decided that he needed to put the title on somebody that was somebody that was a safe, secure bet that wouldn't drop the ball, wouldn't mess up, wouldn't have no scandals, impaired driving, or anything that could set the company back huge if they were the wrong guy. And he chose me, and I turned out to be a good hero for him and a good hero for the wrestling industry. I took wrestling in a different direction, I think. When you look back today, they don't wrestle like Hulk Hogan anymore. They wrestle like Bret Hart. Wrestling's all about action and speed and telling a story, and I think that's where I came in. End quote. So my question is, have we seen the extinction of the big muscle heads who can't move around the ring? Was Fatback the last one? And do you think there is room in today's business to have a Hogan-type persona, useless in the ring, but also oozes charisma? And I guess, what are your thoughts on Bret's overall? I didn't realize he wasn't going to ask you anything about what Bret just said.
Well, I was about to say, well, first of all, there is absolutely nothing about what Bret Hart said there that you can disagree with, and that is not factual in terms of it was the steroid trial and Vince's thought that he was going away, and the thought of trying to, de-emphasize the gigantic, over-muscular, obvious, they used to call them red flags for the steroid issue at the time, and that's why they went to Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and et cetera. Not only that, but you knew with Bret there wasn't going to be I just mentioned Shawn Michaels. At the time, they wanted to go with the more younger, smaller, action-oriented workers that stayed away from the steroid issue. But with Bret, Vince knew there was going to be no drug scandal or no drug issue. Bret was never going to show up impaired, unable to perform. He was going to do his best to present himself as a champion, not just the WWF champion, but a real champion, because he took it seriously. And as we've mentioned, in those days, Bret took himself and sometimes business a little too seriously, but now we see it better to take it too seriously than not seriously at all. And we'd love to have some more guys that thought about the business like Bret Hart. So none of that. I mean, I didn't hear anything that was either groundbreaking in terms of a revelation that people hadn't known before. That was the idea. That's what he did. And he's right in that, he influenced more guys to work like him. Now, part of that is that there's a whole lot more guys that can aspire to look physically like Bret Hart, at least in terms of size and being in condition. You can't aspire to look like Hulk Hogan physically unless you're 6'7" and 300 pounds and blah, blah, blah. Hogan wasn't useless in the ring. Those awards go to, bless him, the Jorge Gonzalez's, the El Gigantes of the world, completely useless. But Hogan was not the athletic worker that Bret Hart or Ric Flair or any of those guys were. But psychologically, his work was good. It just didn't look very good to a discerning eye that's trying to look for, wrestling not to look like bullshit, but because of the massive promotional push behind him and his look and his talk and the psychology they used, they brought a bunch more people in who weren't particularly smart, didn't know what to look for. Just, the big guy beats the little guy, whatever the fuck, right? So, and there's always going to be room in wrestling for big muscular guys that look like freaks and world beaters and badasses and whatever. It's just that that's not all you can feature. And Vince, at one time, that was dangerously close to all he was featuring was big muscle guys. That's why the NWA was able to beat the WWF handily when it came to quality of in-ring and the overall quality of the shows, which is why each company had their individual fans that didn't cross over. Some did, many didn't. Some people liked the ice cream bar superhero stuff, and people who were used to the other style laughed at that and wanted theirs. But so to say that Hogan was useless is way exceeding the case. But again, it was when Hogan got over originally, because just like the reason why superstar Billy Graham got over, the reason why the originators of not only the promo but the bodies always got over. Because in superstar Billy Graham's day, nobody had a body like that. In wrestling, sometimes out of wrestling. When Hogan got the push, nobody had the look and the size and the body and the talk like that. But then when Vince tried to constantly find the next superhero-looking guy, and you go to the Ultimate Warrior, Warrior did a lot of damage to the image of the bodybuilder in wrestling, because he was the classic example of this guy's the shits and nothing you can do will make it any better. It's all body. The guys resented that. A lot of the fans resented it. They didn't want bodybuilders. They wanted wrestling. And the bodybuilders as wrestlers, a lot of them sucked. So anyway, the point is there needs to be variety. And when Vince all he was doing was pushing bodies, that's when everything got so. When he finally had to stop that because of the steroid issue, the wrestling business got better in terms of performance and in terms of the quality of the matches. But an unfortunate byproduct of this monologue I've just given, and then Brian, I'll let you jump in, is the generation that came after thought about Hogan like this guy in terms of there's nothing we can learn here. And there was no redeeming quality. So then you have a bunch of guys who all they concentrate on is their work. And it's like Mick, Cactus, Mankind, whatever. All the people who wanted to copy him focused on was the bumps and the garbage wrestling, because they weren't as talented verbally. They weren't as talented mentally. They didn't understand the psychology. And they couldn't replicate all that. So they just took a bunch of goofy bumps. All the guys who idolized the Bret Harts didn't understand that he also had credibility to him, and the psychology he used in his matches and the way he carried himself. They just think it's all about the work rate, which is not a real wrestling term, by the way. That was made up by the Sheets in the 80s. Nobody ever in a wrestling locker room ever said, how's the guy's work rate? So it's basically, it depends on what camp you're in. To close this thought up, there was good and bad to be taken from both viewpoints, and some people just take all the good and none of the bad from either. Brian, jump in here.
I think the one note about Hogan that's important is he's one of the smartest workers ever. He may not be the most action-packed, but he wouldn't have been Hulk Hogan if he was doing tumble salts.
Right.
And he knew exactly what he needed to do, and he was the perfect Hulk Hogan. Like, no one could have done what he did better than he did it. But he wasn't everyone's cup of tea, obviously.
Could the shit that Hulk Hogan have done that made sense for Hulk Hogan to do have looked better? Yes. But because he wasn't doing screwy shit that he had no business doing, people didn't remark on that. It made sense, so they went with it because he was over.
And you don't see much of a Hulk Hogan influence on in-ring wrestling at all. And like you said, despite who he is out of the ring or whatever, there are things you could learn psychology-wise from Hulk Hogan. You can't learn how to do a moonsault from Hulk Hogan. But there's no influence over modern wrestling. To me, the bigger thing, and Bret Hart's one of my all-time favorites, and for years, it was Bret, Flair, Terry, Piper, Midnight Express. And, Bret and the Express have risen on that list higher than other people in recent years, and Bret's stuff holds up well. Bret's stuff looks really good, and I think the thing with modern wrestling is you can kind of identify which guys were bigger Bret fans and which guys were bigger Shawn fans. You won't see a Hogan influence, you'll see a Shawn Michaels influence, and I tend to really like the guys who study Bret more than the guys who saw Shawn and wanted to do that.
Well, let's branch off in a slightly different direction since you brought it up. Tag teams. For a while, the Road Warriors spawned every kind of imitator that could possibly be spawned. The Road Warriors, Demolition, the Powers of Pain.
T-Joe Khan was a Road Warrior knockoff.
Yes, and then, in other companies, and we could go, if we had a list here, some of them, the teams have not been thought of in many years, but even every local indie in the 90s that started to pop up had a Road Warrior clone. Muscle guys painted their faces. That's the way that Sting and Warrior started out. Muscle guys painted their faces, whether it be the Blade Runners or the Freedom Fighters.
Yeah, add them to the list. I was going to say add the Blade Runners to the list also of Road Warrior imitators.
I just mentioned some of the ones that, people would remember, but they were everywhere. Big, muscle, face-painted team. Who's had the bigger impact now on modern tag team work? Was it the Road Warriors and the muscle guys with face paint, or was it Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express?
I think it was Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, and you also have to bring up the top WWF tag teams, Hart Foundation, Bulldogs.
Yeah.
I feel like modern wrestlers, specifically guys who are tag team wrestlers who care about watching tapes and learning from history, they'll watch those teams and learn something every time they watch a match, even if they've watched those matches over and over. You talk to any wrestler who either just started watching Dennis Condrey or has been watching Dennis Condrey for a while, they'll always still pick up on stuff. And it's not just Dennis, but I'm using him as an example.
Yeah. And the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers.
See, the Fantastic, you know what? And I understand.
As a matter of fact, I think on Twitter, Dax Harwood, somebody asked the question, one of those, give your thoughts on Twitter. Most underrated tag team in wrestling history, and Dax immediately the Fantastics, period, which is probably the case because they were in the ring as good as any babyface tag team of the 80s. And that's how I sold them to Dusty. We asked him to bring them in, I said, the Rock and Roll Express may have had a history of bigger box office, but the Fantastics are the best babyface tag team in the business in the ring.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say that I've actually always thought the fantastic matches in 84 and 88, to me, I always enjoyed those better than the rock and roll matches, although I certainly recognize why the rock and roll matches are the more significant ones.
And, I started thinking, somebody sent an email a couple months ago, and I didn't even save it for one of the shows, but to offshoot that, the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express, and as you mentioned, the Bulldogs and the WWF and the Hart Foundation. But every time that you watch a tag team match now, I'm not talking about the modern indie, the gymnastics, the lucha stuff. Everybody thinks they're in Mexico. I'm talking about when guys have tag team matches where they're doing actual tag team shit. It's something that one of those, 4 or 5 teams that I just mentioned invented.
The only other 2 teams I'll throw in there, because I know what guys watch, Brainbusters and Rockers. And this may have been slightly off your radar, but in 1989, the Brainbusters and the Rockers had some great matches, and Saturday night's main event in 89 was featuring good tag team matches each time. And that's where you got the Demolition 2 out of 3 falls with the Brainbusters. As a kid, it was amazing. Watching now, it's just smoke and mirrors and all sorts of shit. Andre at ringside. But the Brainbusters and the Rockers, because a lot of those house show matches exist, it's a little bit after Midnight Rock and Roll. Well, the first, then the second, and the third run of Midnight Rock and Roll and Midnight Fantastics, but I think that's on the list too, in terms of influence.
Yeah, and Tully and Arn were so good together, but a lot of people think of their singles runs also, and they weren't, unfortunately, a regular featured team that long. What about a year and a half in Crockett? But anyway, when FTR does a lot of callbacks to the moves, but whether it's the rocket launcher or the flapjack or Tully and Arn's spike pile driver, or I get a tickle now at some of the things that I see that these guys are doing on TV today that probably could give a shit whether I drop dead, turn blue, or burst into flame. And they're doing shit that I invented. I kind of get a tickle out of that. Anyway, it's your show.
Did you think 30 years ago we would be at this point where we wouldn't have guys with face paint on steroids? I mean, guys are still on steroids or growth hormone, and guys still every now and then have some face paint, but we don't have any Road Warrior clones really nowadays. Did you think we would get here 30 years ago?
I was hoping we would, but I was afraid we wouldn't. Because the whole thing, again, when something is different, it gets over. But unfortunately, when something gets over, then everybody tries to copy it, and then what it got over about it is no longer different. And the face paint went crazy. As a matter of fact, when I don't know if I ever told you this, when I started Smoky Mountain Wrestling, one of the rules was nobody could have any face paint. I was not going to have any wrestlers with any face paint because not only was the WWF overstocked with that, but also WCW had started. And poor Danny Davis, he was Nightmare Danny Davis, one of my closest friends, right?
He had the big star on his face.
Not anymore. It just like, no, and Joe Pedicino was just gobsmacked at me one night. He came up to see one of our early tapings in Spartanburg, South Carolina, which was, we never got to make it a Smoky Mountain town because we couldn't get TV there in Greenville, Asheville, Spartanburg. But Sandy Scott knew the manager of the old Memorial Auditorium where all the Crockett TVs we shot there. So we got a good deal, and we did a TV taping there, and Pedicino came up from Atlanta. And that was one of the first 3 or 4 tapings we did. And so I was using Buddy Landell at the start. Unfortunately, Buddy in 1992 was Bad Buddy. So we had to, we dropped him, and he came back later on as Good Buddy a couple of years later. But
Moon River Buddy.
Moon River Buddy was the first one. But anyway, he was out doing his thing, and the director cut to a shot of somebody who was holding up a sign that was pro Buddy Landell. And I'm back at the monitor, and I told him, I said, make a note, we're cutting that one out. Pedicino, what do you mean? I said, he's a heel. He said, well, what? But I said, he's a heel. Heels don't have signs. Fans don't like heels. And he was gobsmacked. He was like, well, it shows that the people are interested. I said, it'll show the people are interested when I finish what I'm going to do with Buddy. And he's got a ton of heat. Right now, it's an old Crockett group, and they're happy to see him back. But heels don't have signs from fans that like them. I was trying to make it different. And I did. As a matter of fact, on one of the first Smoky Mountain shows, I had a guy standing in the fucking ring introduced. I'm trying to think what his name was. And then I had old Carl Stiles, who was a piece of work unto himself, under a mask, get a music entrance as the Destroyer or whoever the fuck, and a big entrance. And then I had the job guy standing in the ring go over in the end. So the guy without the music got the win, just because nobody ever did that then. I was trying to make the show different just so people wouldn't go, okay, this is the same as every other program we're watching. And people picked up on it.
So your rules when you first started were no face paint, no heel signs, no junkyard dog.
Well, yes, and that was Rick Rubin's. But unfortunately, I had to agree with him because of the physical condition that JYD was in at that time. And we have lost everybody now when we... The pilot taping for Smoky Mountain Wrestling was shot in Greenville, South Carolina at the Memorial Auditorium where Crockett used to run, because Bobby Fulton at the time was living in Charlotte, and he had found a guy that wanted to put some money in promoting some wrestling events. And one of them that he had booked was at the Greenville Memorial Auditorium. And I needed to shoot 2 episodes of Smoky Mountain Wrestling as pilots to show to TV stations. So I said to Bobby, if I pay for the entire TV production and add some names to your card that you're advertising, can I hop in on this? Absolutely. So he already had Paul Orndorff booked, and I gave Paul some extra money to work a TV match. And Ivan Koloff was already booked for Bobby, and Bobby and his brother Jackie were going to work for me anyway. But one person he'd booked on the show was JYD, and this was late 1991. And Dog was not in good shape. And obviously Rick Rubin, since he was putting up the money for the enterprise, I was keeping him involved on what was going on. And I mentioned the show, and I told him the the names that we had, down for the card. And he said, JYD's not going to be on the show, is he? And I can't imagine Rick Rubin. You've heard his name or heard his voice on documentaries or whatever. I can't do the New York accent. And I said, he said, let's not. I said, okay. So Dog was in the dark match main event after the taping. And he may have gotten his feelings hurt. I don't know. Because when he walked in the building and looked at the lighting grid that we'd flown, he said, God damn, you guys are serious, aren't you? But yeah, no face paint, no heel signs, no JYD on the first television tape. Because honestly, at that point in time, then it would have looked like every other independent, the ex-WWE or WCW or WWF at that time, or WCW Star Tour. Orndorff hadn't been on anybody's TV in a few years. Ronnie Garvin, same thing, and he was over in that area. But we weren't going to just book names that had just recently been on the big TVs to come in and just feed. They had to be part of what we were going to do going forward as a regular promotion.
And you wanted guys to be in shape. You wanted guys that would actually look like they are athletic. And of course, there were gyms everywhere, and it's never been easier than it is right now to work out at home.
Well, that's exactly right, because that's where you need to be spending most of your time, as crazy as the world is these days. But if you've been working too hard but not working out hard enough, and you want to get in shape but don't have time to get to the gym, Echelon brings the gym to you, just like this podcast brings gym to you. Echelon brings a different type of gym to you. When you're trying to reach your fitness goals, folks, it can help to have world-class instructors like Nicole Griffin and Michael Brown. You've heard of them, Brian. They're on the tip of everybody's tongue. They choreograph classes with music from your favorite artists, and you get a community of hundreds of thousands of people who can give you that extra push. They can say, you fat slob, work harder, and look at the state of you. Or they can be nicer Echelon will give you a community and instructors. It's the affordable way to get the workout equipment, the workout community, and an instructor's motivation like run faster, there's someone chasing you. Right in the comfort of your own home, folks. And with Echelon's fitness app,
my God,
it provides you thousands of live. Have you ever had anybody chasing you in your own home?
No, of course not.
It's very frightening. Echelon's fitness app provides you thousands of live and on-demand classes with great music from your favorite artists. You can work out anytime, day or night. Crush your fitness goals. Grind them into powder. Sprinkle them out in your front yard. Just pick your class. Climb the leaderboard. You'll be able to climb this thing in no time at all. Working out on these items, you'll be able to climb that leaderboard like you've been working for the phone company for 25 years. Cheer each other on. Give it your all. Echelon certified fitness instructors are supportive, engaging, and fun. They are supportive of you, Brian. They'll get engaged with you if that's what it needs to motivate you to make you work out harder. And they'll have a little fun on the side with you, apparently. Supportive, engaging, and fun. They know how to get you moving. But, folks, you won't have to move out of your homes to afford this workout equipment because it's affordable, including stationary bikes, smart rowers, sleek fitness screens, and the auto-folding treadmill, which, as we've mentioned before, will not fold up with you inside of it. You can get off first, and then you fold it up, and it's not dangerous. They're all these things and many more are connected to provide the Echelon experience with around-the-clock classes for the family, including full-body workout programs that keep you coming. Back for more. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It was a different line.
Back for more. You'll be coming back for more. That's
they don't
right.
Keep you coming just incessantly. That would get old after a while. One membership covers a family of 5. So it's a large membership, folks. And right now, for a limited time, podcast listeners can get up to $800 off the MSRP. And Brian, you, like I know what MSRP stands for.
That's right.
Yes. Okay. Up to $800 off of it. To get this exclusive podcast discount, you got to text DRIVE, DRIVE, to 818181. Text DRIVE to 818181 to get up to $800 off MSRP value on these fine pieces of equipment. 818181. Just think of me and a cheeseburger. And then you'll remember he 818181. Text DRIVE to that number. Disclaimer. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Where those terms are, we're not sure, but check them out.
What do you text?
You text 8181. No, you text DRIVE to 818181. Or you text the word to the number, DRIVE, DRIVE, to 818181. Limited time only up to $800 off the MSRP, which is a fine piece of equipment in itself.
Let's get our next question here, Jim. This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jack Burton, the Pork Chop Express. I was going back through older clips of the shows on the YouTube page and was listening to you talk about the circumstances surrounding Hulk Hogan leaving the AWA. Brian made mention of Vince's desire to buy the AWA and how Hogan, being fresh off starring in Rocky III, was red hot in the US as well as Japan. There's no denying Hulk Hogan is charismatic, but I was wondering if his upward trajectory in the business would have been different had he not starred in Rocky III. Would he have still been the guy for Vince in WWF's national expansion in the 1980s? Was Vince's attention already on Hogan to begin with, or was Rocky III what put him on Vince's radar?
I truthfully do not know Vince's, inside thoughts on Hogan, but it wasn't. How old are you, Brian? You may not remember this. Okay, then it may be tough for you. But Hogan was hot because of Rocky III, but he was already hot to begin with. He was already going to Japan before he got the role in the movie. Inoki was already featuring him as a top guy over there. He was already had been a main event guy here in the States for a couple of years, not only from Vince Sr. using him in that run in 1980 up there where he named him Hulk Hogan. A lot of people may not remember on the undercard of Bruno and Zbyszko at Shea Stadium, which set the record for the biggest gate in wrestling up to that point in time, was Andre against Hogan when Hogan was a heel there.
And that was also on the undercard of JYD and Michael Hayes.
Yeah, they put it on in the Superdome. That match was a territory boundary shattering match that had appeal. Hogan was also, again, on a tear in the AWA even before Rocky III came out. So, it obviously it was probably serendipitous for Vince. I would have think he would have been thinking in that direction anyway. If he wasn't thinking of Hulk Hogan before Rocky III, it's probably the only reason I can think of is maybe he still had an impression of Hogan as being a heel from the time he was in the territory before. But I can't see why Vince wouldn't have already had him in mind. And then when he went over and saw, what was going on in Japan, that's where he snagged him in November of 83, because he was in Japan at the same time Hogan was. And that's where they first got together and hatched this little plot. Unless I'm misremembering my history. Oh, great savant, Brian, is that the case? November of 83?
Well, in the summer of 83, Vince tried to buy the AWA and he was laughed at by Vern and Greg.
Yeah.
And if you can't get the AWA, why not just go after all of their talent at all their TV stations and all their buildings? And that's what he did. And Hulk Hogan was their biggest. And Rocky III put him over the top. Rocky III made him a big wrestling star and a big star. Rocky III ends up playing a bigger role in 85 once WrestleMania happens. Hogan already had some notoriety, led into the Mr. T connection. But Hogan was getting over, and I think the big thing actually is just when he naturally started getting over as a babyface in the AWA. Remember, he was there with Johnny Valiant as his manager, as a heel.
Yes.
And he started getting over on his own, and
as big a fan as I was of the Valiant brothers, Hogan needs Johnny Valiant for a manager about like I need fucking Crotch Rot.
Johnny Valiant's one of the worst managers ever. I can honestly say that. But Hogan started getting over, and I think the things that really turned it around, obviously he got over real big in Japan. But this is a different universe. Go watch a Hogan promo from 81 and go watch one from late 82.
Yeah.
He figured it out. He figured out how to talk to people and get them to connect with him. I think that was Terry Bollea discovering charisma and then having more of it than anyone else ever. That's what changed the game for Hogan.
Yeah. So, and you made a great mention of that. Well, I saw his first promos in 1979 in Memphis, and my God, it was brutal. And that's why that, Jerry Jarrett laughed and Lawler laughed and thought, this fucking guy, he'll never make it, because he couldn't. The only thing that made his promo better than anybody else's in the territory was Beefcake was his brother at the time, and he was even worse. But otherwise, it was just brutal. But you could tell the guy looked like something, but he was out there talking like an accountant, and he would throw in the superstar Billy Graham. Well, brother, I got the pythons, but with the energy of a fucking 10-watt bulb. And then when they switched him heel in the WWF in 1980, he had Freddie Blassie. And still, like you said, in 81, it wasn't really there, but he'd only been in the business, 2.5 years. And then in that next couple of years, he not only did he get over and improve his in-ring game in Japan because he's working with talent like that, but after doing more television and being a heel and having a run and starting to figure it out, then he got a little more comfortable, and then the promos came, and then the people just naturally in the AWA started taking to him, and they just poor old Johnny Valiant slowly got shipped back to New York City, baby. So, but yeah, I mean, everything worked together. It was the perfect storm of everything. And remember, Hogan was booked on the first Starrcade. He was in the program, but he had gone to, was it the tag team tournament? Because he was working for Inoki, and Vince always sent talent to Inoki's tag team tournament. Was that when they were over there together?
I'm not exactly sure what the tour was, but remember, a lot of things happened in short order. Hogan got married to Linda right around that period of time. And those photos, I got all the magazines from Japan. Those photos got into the magazines. Inoki's there, Andre's there, Adrian Adonis is there, Vince McMahon Jr. is there.
That's right.
Not Vern Gagne. Vince McMahon Jr. He wasn't doing anything with Vince at that point.
I bet Vern had to be talked into going to fucking Greg's wedding.
I'm pretty sure
Crusty old bastard.
I'm pretty sure the Hogans probably didn't want Vern there at that time. But Vince was promising a number of things. But I'm not going to get into all that. But what I was going to say is, with Hogan or without him, Vince was going national. That decision was made years before. He was waiting for his moment. He got the company. He was going to strike. We'll never know what it would have been with Jimmy Snuka or Backlund or what he would have done, or Dusty. I mean, that's the other thing. He can't get Hogan. What would he have done for 84? But Vince was going to do it one way or another, with or without Rocky III.
Yeah.
All right.
So there you go. There's the answer to that question from the fellow up in the little butt plug below Ontario.
All right, Jim. Well, let's move on here. And I have an article that several listeners have sent in. It was published about a day ago from the Sportster. Of course, the new Sports Illustrated for people who are on the internet and have just learned how to read. They have an article. I kid. They have an article here. How Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman are different and how they are the same. Have you seen this article?
I have not seen this. And I'm wondering who had that much time to figure out how all the differences between me and Paul Heyman.
This was written by Joey Haverford. Here's the article. I'll go right to the list. Number 10, you guys are different in regards to romance in wrestling. The view of storytelling in wrestling sees Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman having different approaches to the romantic side. Hold on, I gotta stop right there.
Wait,
when you were learning how to book, did you talk to different people about the romantic side and how to incorporate that into the show?
Well, that's the first thing that I would ask Jerry Jarrett, Bill Watts, Dusty Rhodes, whenever I got to a new territory, I'd say, well, how are we booking our romances here in this territory? What the fuck? Please enlighten me further on this.
Cornette has never been found, I think he means fond. Cornette has never been fond of having romance in wrestling, and even criticized the appeal of Miss Elizabeth during her time with Randy Savage. Heyman has gone the opposite route, and clearly loves booking to that side of things when running a show. ECW had the women involved in romantic angles and love triangles.
Oh, boy.
Heyman showed he still loves that storyline when having Lana, Rusev, and Bobby Lashley in a love triangle when running Raw.
Paulie's love stories or romance or whatever, basically every time you turn around, there's some kind of lesbian three-way, or Kimono Wanalea is going to do a strip tease, or these two girls are both after this guy, but secretly they're still fucking, mashing minges with each other and all this shit. No. We never could have put anything like that on television in Smoky Mountain Wrestling in East Tennessee or Virginia. We never would have put that on OVW television in Louisville. We did do, for example, in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, as you'll remember, the reason why that Brian Lee switched heel and betrayed Tracy Smothers and turned on him and cost him, I believe, the Smoky Mountain heavyweight title, because Brian Lee had been enticed to go over to the dark side once that he saw Tammy Fitch in her string bikini, and she made offers to him. And that's where Tracy's promos were. What was it, Brian? Was it the belt? Was it the girl? Was it the money? Because that's what real guys can understand a friend of theirs stabbing them in the back over. Maybe not the belt. The belt means money and girls. And that's what causes fallout among friends and people to become mad at each other. So that's the kind of romance that you do in wrestling. And Paulie wanted to do, again, all of the, the lesbian fucking love triangles and tomfoolery that he thought was edgy and for young people. And I think he tried to do some of it in OVW, the brief period of time that he got kicked out of Stamford, and I'd been kicked out of there because he wanted to be in Stamford and I wanted to be here, so they couldn't have either one of us happy, so they sent him down here to book OVW. The ratings went south, and he ran off all the regular fans because he changed everything up. He put all of his stooges across from the hard camera so they could cheer at the right things, and I don't know whether it was Beth Phoenix was involved in something. I can't remember who it was. I didn't watch the show at that point in time, but people were telling me it ran them off from going to TV because it was too Northeast, too sexy, too risky, and they didn't like that the guy was fucking both the girls and the girls were both fine with it or whatever. So
really? People have a problem with that?
The regular fans that we had coming to our family show where Danny Davis wouldn't even let people say crap.
Good point.
Old Donna, 50-something years old, had been coming to wrestling for 40 years, didn't want to see hot lesbian action. That was the thing. Paul didn't make his product fit the audience. He started out in a place in Philadelphia where the product that he wanted to do fit the audience, and then he assumed that everybody else and everywhere else in the country was going to like that kind of shit. And it didn't fly in the South because people didn't get it. They didn't understand it. Why the fuck is all this foolishness going on in the middle of our wrestling? But so anyway, that's the difference in Rome. And then I had, when Jackie Gata and Nikita were involved with the Revolution, I had, goddamn, which one was first? Well, there was a variety of personal intrigues in that whole relationship with Doug Basham and Rob Conway and the Damaja and Nikita and Jackie Gata and Johnny Spade was the stooge and the Revolution and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, each guy, Damaja and Basham, that was trying to run the Revolution had their own girl. And then finally, I believe it was Jackie that turned and stabbed the Damaja in the back. And everybody can understand that. No good bitch stabbed me in the fucking back after all I'd done for her. That's the kind of romance you have in wrestling. You don't have people in love with each other and or fucking perverted sex fucking angles are for after the goddamn show, not on it. And you don't have people in love with each other and all smoochy kissy because it's fucking wrestling. So the women are there to stab men in the back just like they are in real life and cause conflict.
The best is still how Paul got out of Beulah McGillicuddy announcing she was pregnant. You want to talk romance in wrestling, and the things that, because they had never been done in wrestling, they were acceptable, but now you look back, they made no fucking sense. Tommy Dreamer, it turns out, got Beulah McGillicuddy pregnant shortly after he had last pile-driven her. Because remember, he was regularly pile-driving her because she was with Raven.
Yeah.
And then it turned out she wasn't pregnant. She was having an affair with Kimono Wanalea. And then Tommy announced he's okay with it because now he's going to fuck both of them. It's the stupidest thing ever.
And that wasn't going on TV in Tennessee or Virginia, and it wasn't going on TV in Kentucky, and it wasn't going on any TV that I would have anything to do with, and it's fucking ridiculous. And that was another thing that occasionally the heel girl needs to get spanked or maybe punched in the fucking mouth or definitely whooped up on by another girl. But that's why me and Bubba Ray had our first tete-a-tete with each other, because without telling me, he power bombed Jillian Hall off the top rope through a table in a dark match, and I had to leave her off for 3 fucking weeks that I didn't want to, because she couldn't come back walking after that. It was fucking ludicrous. And Bubba, because he'd been from ECW, was like, it was a dark match. What difference does it make? 500 people out there saw it. Same 500 people are going to be at our TV next week that can't see her now. Differences in philosophy. I guess that's what this article is about. What was the next piece?
Well, the next one is one in which you are the same. Number 9, you both enjoy unscripted promos.
Okay, that's an entirely fair statement. I have nothing to disagree with that at all.
One thing that many pundits in wrestling seem to fall under the same umbrella of is enjoying unscripted promos. Vince McMahon's presentation of WWE has made good promos more scripted and less authentic. Excuse me, not good. Has made promos more scripted and less authentic over the past 2 decades. Paul Heyman and Jim Cornette were both known for liking to give bullet points and letting the wrestlers speak for themselves. Various WWE stars have revealed that Heyman having more power meant they had more creative freedom to speak in their own voice.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously. Honestly, it would be great if the business was back to promo-wise where it was 40 years ago, where you would just tell the guy, okay, you got 3 minutes, you're wrestling so-and-so, and here's your town, go. And let them do everything. But I did make concessions to modern wrestling, and also especially in OVW, where we were a training program, is that I would write down a sample promo that the guy could give with the information that he was supposed to communicate. And the reason I would write it down is because I'd tell him the story verbally one time. That's the way that it was always done with me back in the old days. They'd tell you verbally, yeah, say this and that and the other thing, or mention this, or here's your town, or here's your stipulation, or whatever the fuck, go do it. But since I was short-staffed and everybody was inexperienced, I would write that in my words, the story, and after I told it to him, I'd hand it to him. And now here's what I just said in case you need to bone up on it again, and I'm doing other shit, but put it in your own words. And then you could determine who was good at promos and who wasn't by who went out there and imparted the information that you wanted imparted, but sounded like that they were coming up with it off the top of their head and saying it in their own words, and who would try to memorize the script that they'd been given after they were clearly told this is not a script. Put it in your own words. Those people probably got along better in the WWF, but they weren't better wrestlers because wrestlers don't read scripts. So that's what I try to do, and I'm sure that's probably what Heyman tries to do also, is get the guys to say it for themselves the way they'd say it if it was happening to them, and then it sounds more individual instead of everybody saying the same thing.
Number 8, a way you and Paul Heyman are different. Relationship with Vince McMahon. The past of Jim Cornette, this is written so weirdly. The past of Jim Cornette saw him used to have a close relationship with Vince McMahon.
Saw him used to have a what?
This is the greatest sentence ever. The past of Jim Cornette saw him used to have a close relationship with Vince McMahon when part of the creative teams in the 90s. However, that went away when Cornette transitioned to running developmental and leaving the company altogether. Paul Heyman returning to WWE to manage Brock Lesnar led him to growing closer to McMahon backstage. Even though he no longer has a role in the creative team, McMahon sees Heyman having an influence that Cornette will never have in WWE again. So McMahon sees that.
Well, that's what McMahon sees. and eggs.
No, Jim.
Well, I honestly, if you want to talk about who's been yelled at more often by Vince McMahon, me or Paul Heyman, Paul wins that one hands down. Because we know that Vince has personally not only blessed Heyman out, as they used to say down south in the old days, blessed him out on a number of occasions, blamed him for the shitty ECW pay-per-view that they resurrected that wasn't Paul's fault, fired him off of that project. Vince is not, I'm trying to think of when Vince ever really yelled at me with evil intent. He raises his voice at a lot of people just yelling about things that are happening and in their direction, but yelling at me has not been that much. And fortunately, as I was about to say, if you ask a lot of people, is your life calmer and more tranquil when Vince McMahon is in it or when he's out of it? You will get the answer that right now my life is more peaceful and tranquil than Paul Heyman's is. He's never going to let Paulie have another creative chance probably Paul would probably decline for reasons we've mentioned, that he knows he's smart enough to not get himself in shit that he can't get himself out of, and it would harm his reputation as a mad scientist if he couldn't make this shit any better, because we passed the point where one person could. So he was there and they hired him and then fired him for running the show that one time because they needed somebody to hire and fire that wasn't Triple H.
You said that Paul's been yelled at by Vince McMahon probably more than you. Do you think there's anyone who's been yelled at by more McMahons than Paul Heyman?
No, because when you take Stephanie into account, because I didn't work that much with Stephanie. I've, worked around her some. She was not that important before I left, thank goodness. So Stephanie's never yelled at me. Linda's never yelled at anybody. And Shane and I always got along just fine and peachy. And the last time I saw him, we had a longer talk than I had with most of the boys. It was down at the Hall of Fame thing. So Paul has definitely been yelled at by more members of the McMahon family. And then if you count Triple H in the family, Paul has almost a clean sweep except for Linda. So the point is, Paul's close to Vince, and he's welcome to keep that spot. And I enjoy the 1,000 or 1,200 mile separation.
Number 7 on this list, ways that you and Paul Heyman are the same. You are both strong commentators.
About life and society, or just related to wrestling?
I think wrestling commentators, and we can both agree on that, I believe, without reading the description here. Correct?
I think that one's a pretty much a gimme, that Paul does a great job on color, and everybody knows that I'm just merely the best.
However, you guys are different. Number 6, you're different when it comes to pushing smaller wrestlers. For whatever reason, I use a photo of Marco Stunt here, but let me read the description.
Which one? Which did me or Paul, either one, push Marco Stunt?
And what a photo they used. But ladies and gentlemen, it says, the view of using smaller wrestlers has seen different philosophies of Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman. This has to be someone from another country writing this. Cornette still insults some of the wrestlers in AEW for being shorter, or generally smaller, as he doesn't think those talents are credible. The history of Heyman has seen him pushing smaller wrestlers in noteworthy roles against giants. Spike Dudley, specifically, was among ECW's bigger faces, due to getting pushed as an undersized underdog hero. The current roster in WWE has seen Heyman not caring about size, as he wanted to help any talents he felt had star power when in control of Raw. So your theories on smaller wrestlers, Jim?
I think he maligns Heyman a little too much here. I will give him Spike Dudley, in that Paul did use Spike Dudley, and Spike's a nice guy. But the big reason that made him a big babyface was because not only was he in the Dudley group, which included Bubba Ray and Devon and etc., but because the gimmick was that they could pick him up and just throw him away, just throw him over the top rope, out of the ring, into the crowd, into the bleachers, into wherever. Remember, that was the feature of doing something to poor little Spike Dudley, where he was launched a significant way and took a big bump, and because he was willing to do it and he was small enough to have it done to him. Am I missing something as to what Spike Dudley's appeal was there in that environment? You saw more ECW than I did.
That was kind of it. He was the gimmick brother of the gimmick Dudleys. He was the little one who took the bumps and got thrown around.
And
that's not to take anything away from him. I mean, that's just what the role was.
Yeah, that's what it was. But, I never had anybody that I particularly had a spot to do that with or wanted to do that with. I never wanted to make it any of my wrestlers' gimmick that they were thrown large distances into dangerous locations for the pleasure of the crowd. You can do other shit that's less dangerous. Now, past that, who did Paulie ever use in ECW or anywhere that he was in charge of, such as any of the WWE programs, that was as small as Dwarf Dong Sucker, old Marco Stunt? Or where did he use anybody that was remarkably smaller or dissimilar in size to a lot of my OVW talent, or even some of the guys in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, that were, none of them that I remember were anywhere near the diminutive stature of the tiny wrestlers that you see today. So I think he's maligning Heyman, like that Heyman also used guys that are 5'3" and 130 pounds, and I don't remember him doing that.
Well, he did use Rey Mysterio in the States.
Oh, well, goddamn Rey Mysterio. Okay, again, just like with the Road Warriors and face-painted muscle guys, just like with everything, there's exceptions to every rule, and they're few and far between, and the reason why they get over is because they're exceptional, because they're different. Rey Mysterio, Hispanic superstar for the fucking kids, fucking tremendous performer, and made it look legitimate. Same thing as Mick Foley and garbage deathmatch wrestling. There's always one, but you cannot compare Rey Mysterio and fucking Marco Stunt.
Well, I'll give you one more.
You are.
And I'll give you one more, and he's not that small. And I'm trying to remember height-wise, maybe 5'8", maybe. But Heyman actually, I think, did it right with him. Mikey Whipwreck. Remember, he was a job guy. Yep, he was a rag doll. He got a fluke victory.
Yeah.
And then somehow he started to learn how to wrestle, but they hit him for a while. He was Cactus Jack's partner.
He was a mopey-faced looking underdog, sort of like Dante Martin, mopey-faced underdog, but without the incredible athletic leaping ability, but with a certain amount of likability, and they made him the fan favorite because the fans felt sorry for him when the big bad heels whooped up on him, and when he went and got a partner or friends or backup that could help him, then the people got behind him. Yeah, and that was an offshoot of the first booking job that Paulie had was what, in
ICW, Mario Savoldi.
Yeah, 88, 89.
No, a little bit after that, I think.
Was it 90, 91, whatever?
Because it was after they sent him home. It was after Flair got tired of him and sent him home.
But he had the gimmick was the wrestling school dropout. And there was a little bit of that, and obviously that never went anywhere, and it was ICW Savoldi's, but there was a little bit of that in Whipwreck also. But point being still, when you look at guys like Malenko and Guerrero, they were small for that time frame. Paulie used them, and I used guys in Smoky Mountain and/or in OVW that were the same size as them, as long as they were talented and looked like athletes. It's not fucking difficult.
I mean, Dean Malenko is what, 5'6", 5'7"? How tall was Candido?
5'6" ish, I think. Yeah. And he was 220 something and could bench press, 400 something pounds.
He looked like an athlete.
Yeah, because he was strong as a bull.
Well, Jim, before we get back to this list, one of the ways that you guys are different is you have been able to keep your hair while Paul Heyman, I don't know what's going on over there.
Paul, the top of his head, the pate of his dome, as they say, folks, is slicker than cum on a gold tooth. It looks like he goes up there with tweezers and removes every single hair follicle one at a time. Most normal people don't look like that, even if they're losing their hair, but it still affects you. It affects you mentally and physically. It might even affect you romantically, because 2 out of 3 men are going to experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35, and more than 50 million men in the United States alone. That's not even talking about Slovenia and the Isle of Man. 50 million men in the U.S. suffer from male pattern baldness, and sad to say, there are only 2 FDA-approved medications that can prevent hair loss, and Keeps offers both of them, along with a simple and stress-free way to keep your hair. No longer will you look like poor Paulie, where you look like Uncle Creepy if he'd been inflated with helium. Because you can have convenient virtual doctor consultations and medications delivered straight to your door every 3 months. You don't even have to leave the house. And because Keeps offers generic versions of those fine hair loss products, the treatment start at just $10 a month. Discreet packaging, proven results. Don't be a Heyman, folks. Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors, and prevention is the key. See, if Paulie had started this 30 years ago, today he'd look like Farkas the Wolfman, but instead, he looks like Uncle Creepy blown up on helium. So, if you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to Keeps, KEEPS.com/JCE to get your first month of treatment for free. That's Keeps.com/JCE, your first month for free. Don't look like a Heyman. Look like a Farkas.
Well, Jim, to keep going with this list of ways you and Paul Heyman are the same and different, at number 5, you are both the same when it comes to clashing backstage with others. The personalities of Paul Heyman and Jim Cornette being polarizing saw them having a lot of the same enemies. What? The personalities of... Let me read that again. The personalities of Paul Heyman and Jim Cornette being polarizing saw them having a lot of the same enemies. Neither man has ever been accused for biting their tongue and struggling to express an opinion either way. Cornette was fired by multiple promotions for clashing backstage with others and even for striking Santino Marella in WWE Developmental. The same issues followed Heyman during his first WWE stint when losing his job due to clashing with Vince and Stephanie McMahon. So you guys are the same backstage. What do you think?
Well, with not just backstage, but anywhere. It's great movie directors. Let's just pick 2. Steven Spielberg, Alfred Hitchcock. Since Paulie kind of looks like Alfred Hitchcock, and I've made a lot of blockbusters, so I kind of
give me
like
a break.
Spielberg.
Give me a break.
Nothing like each other, but they neither one want somebody else coming in and telling them how to make a movie, right? So it's just natural. We have the same trait that we see what we're trying to do, and we see what everybody needs to do to get there, and we get cranky when other people don't see that. So I can't argue with that categorization, but since we went through and worked out one time how many times I actually had been fired by anybody versus quitting, walking off, or just mutually agreeing not to choke each other. And I don't know whether Paul might have the edge on me or not, or at least we might be tied, because he was fired when Stephanie got mad at him, and he was writing SmackDown, right, in the 2000s. And he got fired. Was that a different firing than when they did the ECW resurrection and they fired him after that because they blamed him for the thing sucking when they told him to make it suck? And they fired him here a year or 2 ago as what was the title they gave him when he
Executive Director?
Executive Director. So they only fired me once from a consultant's deal, the WWE, but they fired him 3 times from different positions. I wasn't fired from WCW. I quit, but Flair fired him, but they brought him back because he threatened to sue. Let's see. I'm trying to think, where else was I fired? I think it's about even, maybe 3 or 4 apiece. What do you think?
Well, one way you guys are different, at number 4, your opinion of today's wrestlers. Wrestling has drastically changed from the peak eras of Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman in wrestling. One of the two has clearly acclimated to those changes better than the other when looking at their track records. Cornette had a failed run in Ring of Honor and now just podcasts primarily about the things he dislikes in the business. Heyman has developed a close bond with dozens of recent WWE wrestlers, from current top stars Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, to the released younger talents like Aleister Black and Murphy. And for the record, Jim,
was there a period on that?
That was the period, okay. And again, this is about your opinion of today's wrestlers being a difference. The photo used, even though not exactly referenced here, and I don't know if Heyman's ever said anything, is Kenny Omega. We know your opinion of him, but I don't know what Paul Heyman's opinion of him is.
I don't know why he's there, since I don't think Paul has openly said yay or nay on him, either one. Well, it is only natural that Paul would have more friends in the modern wrestling community because he still is involved in it, and I would have more friends in the wrestling community of the 80s and 90s, because if Paul worked with them in the 80s and 90s, chances are he still owes them money or cost them their homes or cars or whatever the case. So they're not happy with it. I think Dreamer was the one that fantasized about hopping the rail at WrestleMania and shooting him in the head.
Yeah, well, so, he's filled with all sorts of bad ideas, so let's not use him as the barometer.
But I'm just saying. Well, then there was Candido and Tammy, who were, from their own lips, told me, yeah, we lost our home because Paul never paid us back all the money we charged up on our credit cards when he made us assistant booker so we'd pay for the trans. And let's face it, Paul, the one thing that I've said about Paul of late is that bless him for having the patience and the energy and the desire to still do this shit. Bless him for it, because he's 3 or 4 years younger than me. I know he doesn't look like it, but he is. And he still wants to go to these buildings every week. And he went to Saudi fucking Arabia. And he wants to fly on the corporate jet. And apparently wants to be on TV. And bless him for that. And to do that, he's got to put up with some of this modern foolishness. I can't bless him for that. But it's not like he's always had people that he saw something in that he wanted to push when he was in a position of power. The same thing with me, and the same thing with every other booker. And I don't see Paul pushing or being interested in a lot of the silliness these days just because he's Paul. And I think that he probably just diplomatically hides it or disguises it better. But he's still working with Roman Reigns. He's still working with Brock Lesnar. The people that he works directly with are either top guys that there's no foolishness to and he knows will draw money, or younger guys that he feels can be put in that position. So he's not out there advocating for Luchasaurus and fucking whoever. So I don't see that big a difference either. I think Paul just still wants to do this stuff, and bless him. And that's why he, I'm sure, hides his eye rolling, except for certain guarded confidants, at most of the shit that goes on, because he knows the same thing as I do and the same thing that a lot of people do. A lot of it's bullshit. He's softened up and doesn't express it as much anymore.
Well, let's see how he has softened up about this next one. Number 3, a way that you and Paul Heyman are the same: blood in wrestling. The use of blood in wrestling is another polarizing topic that sees drastically different opinions from various sides. Paul Heyman, I don't know why I feel like I have to read this in a wacky manner. Paul Heyman and Jim Cornette have shown the same side of the argument as bookers who use blood to advance stories. Heyman did it quite often in ECW and essentially ushered in the changes that influenced the Attitude Era for WWE. Cornette has a more old-school approach of wanting blood in big matches, as he feels it adds to the story and drama. Nothing too wrong there, right?
That's exactly correct. And they brought up something that, unfortunately, because of Shitstain being an ECW mark and because of Bruce getting a kick out of it, there were things that were brought over from ECW that led to parts of the Attitude Era, and basically the tables and the chairs and the concertos and the coast to coasts, then the Van Daminators and the fucking furniture and the kendo sticks and the ridiculous amounts of blood and the barbed wire and blah, blah, blah. And that's something that Paul's never going to be able to live down. He's responsible for a lot of it. On the other hand, my hands are clean. I don't have to take any of the blame for all that shit because I never overdid blood. I did blood in wrestling the same way that it's always been done, in main events and big matches and or angles to increase attendance at same, and not overboard and ridiculous, and with the not only just the blood but also the furniture, because the furniture is worse than the blood. You can bleed all day long and not hurt yourself, but you take one wrong bump in that furniture, you're fucked. So I don't disagree with the statement of the article there, but there was more to it in that Paul's usage of violence in general led to a lot more damage being done to the wrestling business than anything that I did. And then, as we all know, OVW, because it was based in Kentucky, with the Athletic Commission regulations, we had no blood, which hurt us in some cases on a few big matches, but didn't kill us. And if you'd have taken the blood out of ECW during its heyday, the people would have set seats on fire. So it is what it is.
And that somewhat ties into number 2 here on the list. A way that you and Paul Heyman are different: hardcore wrestling. Even though Jim Cornette enjoys the use of blood in big matches, he is one of the biggest haters against a hardcore wrestling style. Cornette loathes when wrestlers use too many weapons or turn it into the hardcore genre instead of making it a limited aspect of the performance. Paul Heyman made his reputation as the booker of ECW when booking hardcore match after hardcore match. The belief that violence sells was used by Heyman to make ECW drastically different than WWE and WCW in the mid-90s.
Violence does sell. Horse shit doesn't sell. Well, let's say if you're trying to grow gardens, it might sell. There's a difference between violence among professional fighters and phony shit that obviously hurts and at the same time requires cooperation for people to put on a stunt show display and whack each other with blunt instruments. There's the difference. If you can't figure it out in your own mind, I could spend a half an hour more explaining it, and it wouldn't make any sense to you anyway because you can't pick up on it. But that's the difference. And the kind of violence in ECW also was a turnoff to any wider audience or to any more reputable television outlet or to any reputable sponsor. They can sponsor a UFC match where the two guys in the main event fighting for a championship bust each other up and they're bleeding from the eye or bleeding from the head. But when you've got guys laying in the ring with tables and barbed wire and chair and light tubes and kendo sticks, and it's just a big bunch of bullshit with no athletic ability being displayed, then you've drastically cut down not only your potential viewers, but also your potential revenue, and you've made your business look like something that is on the level of the people that bite the heads off the chicken at the county fair. Just things that normal people don't want to be involved with.
Do you think what we now call the hardcore style, and originally it wasn't called that, you were a hardcore fan if you really were into wrestling, and then somehow the wrestling that the hardcore fans watch became hardcore wrestling, and then that just degenerated into all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what Paul Heyman actually likes? Or do you think that's what Paul Heyman knew he needed ECW to be? Because this actually touched on an important point. ECW wasn't a third promotion. It wasn't a Northeast promotion. It was presented as an alternative. to what was out there at the peak of both companies being really bad, 94, 95. Do you think it's what Paul Heyman liked or what he thought was necessary for that audience?
Well, it was necessary for the Philly audience because that was the first town that got a significant smart fan population that knew what was going on behind the scenes. And also Philly being the sports crowds being particularly bloodthirsty, and just the building that he was in, that dump, that piece of, that is the, I've been involved in wrestling and or going to wrestling matches since 1974. And I've never been in a shittier place, in a shittier part of a town than the ECW arena. Now the 2300 arena, or what did they say? They've redone it. I was there when Ring of Honor was using it 10 years ago. It was a toilet that didn't even work. But to get people to go in there, it was the grunge craze, the fucking Kurt Cobain. I'm a multimillionaire rock star, but I'm miserable and I'm going to shoot myself and leave my wife and baby because we're all fucking miserable. And everybody wants to fucking bash themselves over the head with shit and the fucking, Marilyn Manson shit and blah, blah, blah. And he had a place there where he could put 1,000 people that wanted to see a bunch of fucking chaos in a building and make it look on television like that this was a hot thing. And that's what he was doing, smoke and mirrors. If he'd have started promoting in Dallas, Texas, if he had tried to do that shit, it wouldn't have worked. Or any, a normal town somewhere else. But you had a bunch of people that were smart to the wrestling business, so they had to see guys go even further. It's the Northeast anyway. People are naturally a little bit more fucking cynical and fucking whatever. He had a bunch of guys within driving distance there that would do that kind of shit, plus the ones that he could bring in. It was, and he created smoke and mirrors that this is the alternative promotion, and got enough of a buzz that the other companies, because they were floundering, started doing some of that shit, which was hot-shotting. And then, combining that with the Monday Night Wars and the big budget fight between WCW and WWF, now people are seeing that, and that's why the Attitude Era took off. Hot-shotting on both sides, doing all this crazy shit people hadn't seen before. And that's why we've never been able to follow it since then. You got no more Rock and no more Austin. We've done everything we can do wrestling-wise. You can't impress anybody anymore with an angle. And everybody's smart. And business has been going down ever since then, as I kind of predicted 20 years ago, but nobody would listen to me. But it's funny, like we said earlier in the program, now all the people that were big in the 80s, now the people are imitating other people. Now suddenly all the predictions from the 80s and 90s that have come true, people are going, he was saying that shit 25 years ago. Anyway, what was next?
Well, finally, here on the list, number 1, a way that you and Paul Heyman are the same. You're both all-time great managers.
Well, who can argue with that?
No one. The guy just wrote some stuff here that's nice, so we won't read it. But that was 10 ways that you and Paul Heyman are the same and different. Any closing comments about whatever the hell this was?
No. Otherwise, then it's good to know that they're teaching English in Slovenia these days.
Some of those sentences, I'm trying to read them, and it's like my brain goes crazy. I'm like, what are these words in this order? Let's get another question here. Let's see if we have any good ones.
I think that horse has left the barn, cowboy.
Yeah, this one's completely out of hand, so let's go to another one here. See, I'm going to ask this one because we get a lot of this. So I'm going to ask this one so we don't have to approach this topic again for a while.
Okay.
This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Odin Resurrected. If Tony Khan gave you the opportunity to book and run AEW Dark and Elevation...
Oh, good Lord.
Would you book it like Smoky Mountain, or would you do things differently? Me and my son love you.
Well, thank you for that. No, you can't.
And I said I'm asking this for everyone. We get a lot of questions. Will Jim just go there and book? Can Jim... and then we get the ones, will Jim just book the YouTube shows? That's my favorite.
No, I won't. Well, first of all, I wouldn't book it like Smoky Mountain Wrestling because I don't have access to the Rock and Roll Express, the Heavenly Bodies, Tracy Smothers, Dirty White Boy, Bullet Bob Armstrong, and anybody in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And you couldn't do it like that unless you had that kind of talent because they were the only ones that knew how to do it. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be booked like OVW, which was booked like a real pro wrestling promotion with young talent. But no, I wouldn't. If I wouldn't book the TV show, I wouldn't book Dark and Elevation or whatever else is on YouTube. I don't want to book anything because I want to live a long and happy life from here on out, which is free of the fucking pain and inflammation, as the Dream used to say on his Stand Back Powder commercial. The pain and inflammation of dealing with all of these fucking numbnuts in the wrestling business these days, and the TV stations and the TV networks and the buildings and the bullshit. I don't want to do it. It doesn't mean that I believe that people who want to do it should be allowed to do a rotten job. I think if people want to do it, they should still be held to a standard like do a good job at it. But no, I wouldn't book those things because I don't want to book anything because I have trouble enough keeping up with mailing my merchandise, and I can do that from the house. But they don't seem to understand that the only reason they have these 13 or 14 or 15 matches on these YouTube shows is because they went crazy at the start of the thing, and Tony Khan hired everybody's friend. And now they've got a bunch of people that have no business in a national wrestling promotion, either not now because they're not good enough, but they will be someday if they get more experience, or not never know how. They should have been involved. They just got jobs because they were friends with people that Tony liked. So they have to fucking have 20 of these 4 or 5 minute fucking goofy matches on a YouTube show. They could be using that exposure, limited as it is, though more so than the TV show, but at least you can see it worldwide, to still focus on, concentrate on, and get over their major and main talent that they need now, instead of using it to justify contracts because Tony, bless him that he didn't want to fire people in a pandemic, but many of these people never should have had jobs to begin with. And from what I heard in 2019, which is the last time that I was speaking to a wide variety of modern wrestlers in either MLW or the NWA or wherever, he was paying a lot of these guys from the start 5 times as much money as anybody else had ever paid them in their life, just because he had no idea of what salary structure to use in his wrestling company because he'd never had a wrestling company. And he went on the recommendations of all of these people's school friends. Yeah. Old Ben there, he's great. Give him $250 a year and we can snatch him up right now. Yes, of course, he was working for $125 a match last week. But you got money. So that's why they have to use all these fucking either guys who are just getting out of wrestling school or still in it and should not be exposed on YouTube worldwide. They ought to be wrestling in a goddamn high school gym somewhere in front of 200 people so they can learn their shit. They're putting them on YouTube. And they're also putting other people on YouTube because they're paying them anyway, so why not? They're not good enough to be on a real television show now that they have talent. So what he's going to have to do is what one time Kerry Silken had to do in Ring of Honor, to have a come to Jesus meeting about whether or not he wants to actually have a real company and free up some money to hire some new talent that the WWE is willing to hand him regularly, it seems like, up until lately, on a silver platter, and get rid of some of the dreck that makes his company look like the amateur hour, or whether he keeps wanting to run Make-A-Wish and just pay everybody because he doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
If you make it about money, you're going to lose the argument. He has an unlimited budget.
But that doesn't mean that you didn't fucking find a cure for cancer and contribute to some handicapped children. Don't give bad indie outlaw wrestlers jobs making 5 times what they've ever made because they're not worth it. This is not Make-A-Wish. So that's what I think of for the most part, as a matter of fact, you know what? Look up the most recent results of his most recent YouTube show.
I don't know which one airs when. So okay.
Well, just whatever. Just AEW Dark. And by the way, where did the Big Show go? Isn't he supposed to be hosting one of those shows?
I think he went dark.
Does that means he can never be seen ever again on network television and TNT or TBS because he's doing the only one of the biggest names in wrestling that they have?
See, Tony's doing like a multiverse, and there's a whole nother thing we don't see behind the scenes with Big Show and Mark Henry. They all hang out and have food, and it's a great time.
It's kind of like the Young Rock when the Iron Sheik was hanging out with Andre the Giant and Rocky Johnson and the Wild Samoans and Randy Savage in Hawaii in 1982 when half of those guys didn't even have the same gimmick then. But go ahead. Do we have any results?
I do. So apparently there are a couple different shows. There's Dark and Dark Elevation. I have the Dark Elevation results.
That's the one you have to be high to watch. The Elevation.
Well, this is the one that was taped the same day they taped Dynamite. So it would be Dynamite Rampage and Dark Elevation. I believe they're taping Dark at Universal Studios, right?
Yes. One of them they've had to go to the sound stages.
So this is actually at the arena. So this is...
Yes. So in addition to a Dynamite show and a Rampage show, those poor people in whatever arena have to watch the following matches that you're about to recount.
The opening match, Nyla Rose, The Bunny, and Emi Sakura with Vicky Guerrero. That sounds like the worst match ever. I don't even know who that wrestler is. Oh, my God. All right. Well, let's go back to this card. So the opening match is Nyla Rose, The Bunny, Emi Sakura with Vicky Guerrero. I have all their records here. Versus the team of Jessica James, Gigi Ray, and my new favorite name, Lady Bird Monroe.
What?
In a six-woman, tag team match.
That sounds like a Dusty Rhodes ad, and we're going to call her Ladybird. Ladybird Monroe. That's like Nighthawk Coltrane and Ladybird Monroe going to come out here.
All right.
Next.
Well, it's nice to know that Lady Bird Johnson's name is being passed on the YouTube show, at least. The winner was Nyla Rose, The Bunny, and Emi Sakura via pinfall. The second match, Red Velvet versus, I may get this wrong, Maddie Renkowski.
Oh, from the Boston Renkowskis.
Red Velvet's record goes to 37-19 with a victory via pinfall. The third match, oh boy, did you miss a big one here, Jim. Bear Country coming in with a record of 12-9, going against Chaos Project, coming in with a record of 3 wins and 21 losses.
And the Chaos Project are
Luther.
Oh, Jesus.
And Serpentine. Excuse me, not Serpentine. Serpentico.
Serpentico. Or Serpentine Fire, if you're a Maurice White fan. Okay, yeah, this is the quality of matches that you're going to see, and these are people that are getting paid by this company to be professional wrestlers. Go ahead.
The winner, going to 13-9, is Bear Country. In the fourth match of the evening, Andrade El Idolo with Jose, the assistant, versus Quan. The winner, Andrade El Idolo, going to 8-4. He won via pinfall. The fifth match, Thunder Rosa, coming in with an impressive record here. Wow, where were all these matches? 42-6.
What?
42 wins, 6 losses.
You've been on TV 3 times.
Versus Amber Rodriguez, coming in with a record of 0-0, obviously an even fight. Thunder Rosa wins via pinfall. The sixth match, Jim, you could be booking this. The Dark Order, comprised of Evil Uno, Stu Grayson, and Preston Vance, versus 2.0, And the Hardy family office,
Oh,
consisting of, well, actually, I don't know who it is, says 2.0 and Matt Hardy office, and it says Matt Hardy, Isaiah Cassidy, and the Blade, so that's 3 people. And then 2.0 is 2 people. And it's a 6-man. I don't know what happened here.
Yeah, I don't know.
The winner is the Dark Order via submission. And that was Dark Elevation.
They shot all that with all that fucking green subpar talent in front of a big arena of people that came to see Dynamite with Punk and Danielson and Page and blah, blah, blah. And also, as I mentioned, they're paying all those people. He's not running Make-A-Wish, but it sure does seem that way because most of those people would not actually be on a legitimate wrestling production if it weren't for the kindness of the benevolent owner, Tony Khan. And again, Luther, just because he's Jericho's friend, Cutlet, and one of the other Stooges, because they were high school friends of the Hardley boys, and Knock It Off, and all the Japanese girls, because they're friends of Twinkle Toeses. And you can trace the family tree, and then all the people you've never heard of because they're in their wrestling school. So let's put the people in the wrestling school in front of 5,000 people at the big building in Dallas. When the WWE would come to Louisville and run Freedom Hall back in the day because Louisville was one of their hottest towns since we were doing the groundwork for them here, they'd sell out. And we would pick 1 or 2 matches involving the OVW talent that was under contract that would get to be showcased on that event based on these are the top guys. It's the tag team title on the line or the heavyweight title on the line or main event guys in OVW, so that the WWE brain trust could see them in action in front of one of their own crowds. And at the same time, 20,000 people in Louisville would see what OVW was about. And we weren't going to put guys in the amateur class out there in front of 20,000 people in Freedom Hall. It was our best. And they made an impression, and it helped our business, and it helped them grow. All you're doing when you're putting these greenhorns on in front of 5. Well, look at Dante Martin, fell completely apart and looked as worse as he's ever looked against MJF last week on television because it was too big, too fast, and he wasn't ready for it. And you could tell he was both confused and he was rushing and he was trying too hard and he was probably freaked out and all this spotlight on him as an individual. And several people mentioned it looked like here he's a freak athlete and it looked like he got gassed out before the match was over. Well, the reason for that is when you're that fucking nervous and tighter than a banjo string, you're not breathing out there. That was what I was told. And it's true. The very first thing when I got into business, fortunately, my first wrestling matches where I was really scared shitless because I really didn't know what I was doing, were on the undercard in front of very few people because it was spot shows. Not national TV where the guy's got to do 17 different varieties of dives and he's going to miss half of them.
Well, of course, Jim, this is not regular TV, and I have found the results for Dark. To be fair, if you were going to book the YouTube show, Dark is the main event show, not Dark Elevation. I think you want to be elevated to get to Dark, right?
Well, I would think that once you're dark and then you're being elevated out of the dark, Dark Elevation should be ahead of Dark.
Tell me if you think this show's better. Maybe this will entice you to book AEW. Chris Statlander defeated Marina Shafir.
Well, she's there now?
Yeah, you didn't hear that?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and also, she and Roderick Strong are a significant other couple, as I recall. So maybe that's good news that we might see Roddy show up and he and Kyle can hopefully rescue Cole from the clutches of the Lollipop Guild. But go ahead.
Nick Comoroto defeated Dean Fleming. What a name for a wrestler. What a name for a wrestler.
Fleming. The grandson of Ian Fleming, I understand. He's got a secret agent gimmick.
Now, I got to specify here, one of the spellings is R-Y-O, but Riho teamed with Ryo Mizunami to defeat Emi Sakura, and I believe it'll be, is it Mai Saruga?
Wait a minute.
Maybe it's Mai Saruga.
Mai Saruga, when you gonna give it up? Give it up. When you gonna give up that wrestling, Saruda? Cause you just suck. You just suck. You're just really bad. You ought to quit, Saruga.
The Saruga part I'm pretty certain of. But, yeah, Rio and Rio won.
Rio and Rio.
Jade Cargill defeated Valentina Rossi. I don't know if she's any relation to Len Rossi. We can only hope. Angelico defeated Invictus Cash.
What?
Or Cash.
What?
I don't know who
Invictus Cash?
INVICTUS KHASH. It's one of the options.
Invictus. That's an odd first name. Invictus. Wait a minute. Hold on. I've heard that word before. Inviolate, invisible, investment, invidious. No, there's an invidious, but there's no Invictus. Maybe he should be invisible.
Well, the next match was a handicap match. Heather Monroe lost to the team of Ty Conti and Brody Lee Jr. Then
no, wait.
That must have. I didn't see it, so we don't know if that made air. We don't know. Well, actually, if it was here, maybe it made air. I'm not sure.
Well, it was done in front of a human. If it was done in front of a human, that's a disgrace. They've put the kid in matches now with girls. That's.
Oh, I didn't realize that was the problem. Okay.
Well, no, I'm just that they're putting the kid in matches, but now they're putting the kid in matches with girls. Maybe when they fucking potato him or land on him, they won't hurt him as bad as the guys would. But just there's so many things wrong with that. I don't even know where to start. And now they're not even trying to be a professional company. It's just like a fucking amateur charity fucking play or whatever.
Well, we had some tag team action. Lee Johnson and Brock Anderson defeated Fabu Andre and Tony Donati via pinfall. Then we had Chuck Taylor defeat Ryan Nemeth. Sean Spears defeated Josh Woods. Nyla Rose defeated Zeta Zhang. Arjun Singh defeated Tony Vincita.
What the?
And in the main event, 2.0 and Daniel Garcia defeated the Dark Order. Jim, you could be booking this.
No, I couldn't. Again, they're paying all these people. There's no reason for that programming. 4 or 5 of the people that you just mentioned should be getting a nice win in about 3 or 4 minutes on television every few weeks. And the rest of them, if they're going to have a wrestling school and a developmental program, then they need to go ahead and instead of wasting valuable time in big buildings when they are doing television and burning their crowd out, they ought to run some spot shows in Carrollton, Georgia. Maybe they can find Sammy Kent. He could probably help them get in the Alpharetta auction barn.
Uncle Sammy?
Uncle Sammy. And let these guys work on little shows where they can figure things out in front of people that are not going to be too, what's the word I'm searching for? Too particular about whether they're main event stars or not. And don't put the video of this on worldwide YouTube so everybody will see these schlubs and go, well, goddamn, they're greener than pepper trees. But that's just that's just being too nice and letting everybody be a pro wrestler on your dime. So there you go.
And for the record, the results I read may have been wrong. Let's correct the record. -1, Brody Lee Jr. I checked a couple other sources. It says he was at ringside with Anna Jay, maybe not necessarily in the match.
Okay, slightly better, but still
so
no.
let's just make sure we
all right.
clarify for the record here.
Slightly better, but still no. What is he, 8 years old?
No, I think he's older than that.
9, 10? He seemed painfully small.
He's a kid.
The point is he's a kid.
I'm saying it to you. He's a kid.
I'm saying it to everybody. He's a kid. Don't make him a manager at ringside in a professional wrestling show. It's not fair to him, and he's going to grow up with a skewed mentality of something. Like I said, if they wanted to do something for the family, which I'm all in favor of, put him through fucking college. Don't embarrass the wrestling business. By now, everybody's kid can be a part of it. Like I said, after my dad died, everybody at the Courier-Journal was very nice. They did not invite me to the board meeting the next week to get up and speak with Barry Bingham Sr. Go ahead.
That was AEW Dark.
Good.
Well,
Can
Jim,
we turn the lights back out?
We could turn the lights back on because I think after hearing about a show like that, if you were awake, you might be hungry.
Boy, I tell you what, and you know what? Here's the problem, Brian. What is this now? The people are going to be hearing this 3 days before Christmas, right? So as a result, normally people's problems are, what do I get so-and-so for Christmas? But now the biggest problem is, regardless of what I get them, how am I going to get it there? Because of all the shipping delays and the problems with the post office and the rush and the hustle and bustle of the holiday season. Well, folks, I'll tell you what. If you want to get something that's a perfect gift, and not only that, but get it there in time, Omaha Steaks is standing by, and they are ready to ship today. This is what they do for a living. They pack it in that incredible styrofoam cooler. It's frozen, it's vacuum sealed, it's ready for your freezer or for your grill. All you got to do is thaw it out, and it arrives quickly, and they are standing by now with meat in their hands, ready to just pitch the whole box at you. So you don't have to worry about getting the perfect gift. And if you act quick now, it's only 3 days till Christmas. Can't wait till February. You can get this stuff there on time. All you got to do is go to omahasteaks.com. They are standing by. If you enter JCE into the search bar and get the perfect gift package today, you're going to get over 50% off. 4 bacon-wrapped filet mignons, 4 boneless chicken breasts, 4 Omaha Steaks burgers, 4 gourmet jumbo franks, 4 individual scalloped potatoes, 4 caramel apple tartlets, a jar of the signature steak seasoning, and if you go to omahasteaks.com and use the keyword JCE in the search bar, 8 additional Omaha Steaks burgers for free. As I've mentioned before, you can feed a family of 4 on this through the holidays, or you can just order it for yourself and stuff it down your neck until February, you gluttonous Epicurean pig. But whatever you do and whoever it's for, go to omahasteaks.com, use the keyword JCE in the search bar, the perfect gift package, save over 50%, only $99.99 for all of that food that I just mentioned. Great flavor, incredible value, and 100% guaranteed. Achieve your gifting greatness today with Omaha Steaks. Brian, are you an Epicurean glutton?
No.
Well, you ought to be.
Okay, I'll take your word for it, but I am hungry.
They're
Omaha
much
Steaks.
better than those damn Protestants, I'll tell you that.
All right, well, let's get a few more questions here. Jim, hold on, I'm clicking around. There's all sorts of stuff that have been sent in. We got a few questions, naturally, as we have the last several weeks about Vince McMahon.
Oh, boy.
Before we get to any of these, have you caught up at all? Have you seen any of the latest installments of the WWE version of Tuesdays with Maury, Vince McMahon and Austin Theory?
You know, we said here a couple weeks ago, the only thing worse than Vince not seeing anything in you is Vince seeing something in you. Because now Austin Theory, my boy, what have they done to my boy? I said, this guy is incredible. What a prospect. He's got the body. He's got the look. He's got the size. He can work the little things. I would have loved having this guy in OVW. I would have pushed him to the moon because he's got all the little things that you either can't teach or sometimes it takes forever to teach. So naturally, they took him from NXT, rescued him from the Same Face family, Johnny and Mrs. Same Face. Now he's on Raw, but he has become Vince McMahon's pet project, who apparently from these vignettes, Vince is trying to teach him to have the killer instinct and go out and make something of himself. And Vince is threatening him with the pencil and the noted eraser. And there was another backstage vignette interaction with Vince and Austin Theory on Raw this just last night, Monday night. And I watched this clip. And again, there's Austin Theory trying to do the best he can with what he's being told to do, but basically it amounts to nodding up and down and going, and yes, sir, and taking selfies of himself with things and people. But Vince was mad at him in this clip because apparently he had been defeated by Finn Balor in a match earlier in the show. And then after that, wouldn't you know, it's not just an epidemic, Brian, in AEW or in some of the outlaw promotions, but it's the WWE as well. It's the entire world of wrestling. There's Finn Balor doing an interview back in the back of the building, and here comes Austin Theory and tackles him. At least he got about 30 seconds out, though, not like in AEW, where they can't speak at all before they get attacked. Balor got about 30 seconds out. And then here comes Austin Theory and beats him up and runs him into the equipment cases. And, of course, immediately the announcer just backs up and becomes a mute, doesn't scream, "Oh, my God, help," or anything, just gets out of the shot. And all the damage is done. And then, at least at the end, quality control in the WWE, they run in one referee and I think, who was it that was standing around? Somebody else in a suit to say, "Get the heck out of here." And then Austin Theory goes into Vince's office to tell him what he's done. Hey, even though I lost the match, that was a cold-blooded, ruthless attack that I just made on Finn Balor. And Vince says, yeah, but even though, and this is a quote from Vince, even though you beat, as we might say, the chocolate pudding out of him. So over on AEW, they're saying shitty McShit, shit face, shithead, beat the shit out of, you're a piece of shit, shit. And over in WWE land, Vince says you beat the chocolate pudding out of him.
Suffer and succotash.
And then he says, but I should, and I'm, by the way, he's not saying it with this much oomph and power and projection and clarity. He said he ought to fire Austin Theory because he loves firing people before the holidays. It makes him feel good, like he just had a good meal, gives him a warm. They're doing a parody of what people used to believe was the real Mr. McMahon because Vince was so good at being Mr. McMahon that people had those thoughts. And now they're parodying people who are probably writers who were children when he was Mr. McMahon are now parodying, Vince to where he's Ebenezer Scrooge and bah humbug. And it's a whole, and I'm sure he loves it too because, it's great shit, pal. But the clip that I saw, Brian, besides the fact that he brought the pencil out again and Vince tried to tear a piece of his legal pad off, and he tore it in half. Instead, he couldn't tear the whole page off of the legal pad. It looked like Bobby Heenan doing the old phone book tear stunt where he would tear 3 pages and put it down like he was satisfied.
No, you know what it looks like? I swear to God, it looks like he's a fucking Muppet. It looks like the Vince head, the weird Vince head. It's like one piece, and then someone else is working the hands because he's always sitting and he's hunched over. So there's like a torso And then there's just crazy hands going all over the place.
The hands are going everywhere.
I think it's Frank Oz working the hands and someone else is working the Vince head. It looks nuts. It looks like someone else is doing his hands.
But who's the one that had to stick their hand up Vince's ass then is what I want to. But anyway,
Bruce.
He's got the paper.
It was Bruce.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce been able to get his hand up Vince's ass. His head is so big and it's lodged there. So Vince scratches something he's written with a pencil. He erases it and then holds the paper up and blows the eraser shavings in Austin Theory's face. But here's what I was going for with what I was about to tell you was I saw this clip. It was sent to me and apparently it was on YouTube, right? This wasn't a clip directly off. I don't know where it was directly off of, but the point is, without me doing it, the closed captioning for the hearing impaired was on this clip. And from the time it had the announcer that asked Finn Balor the question, and it had Finn Balor's response, and then you see the attack, and then it goes into the Vince's office, and you see him talking to Theory, and then it started having some trouble because, as we've mentioned, yes, Vince is it's some of it's under his breath,
Pencil.
and they were piping the crowd noise in really loud in this anyway.
Really loud. What
really
the hell
loud.
was that? Yeah.
I've been in Vince's office. He doesn't have a studio audience in the office, right? So they were piping the noise from the arena into this as some kind of background. But what it made it hard to hear Austin Theory, but it made it almost impossible to understand Vince because he's not projecting. He's got the gruff voice now, and it's under.
Yeah.
So I'm watching. As I'm watching Vince trying to get these things out, my eyes are drawn to closed captioning. And the closed captioning is not able to figure out what Vince is saying anyway. And one of the closed captioning statements was when Vince was first starting to read Austin Theory out about maybe he made a bad decision in seeing something in Austin Theory. He said, I didn't get to be a billionaire by making stupid business decisions, but the closed captioning, plain as day, said, I got to be a billionaire by making stupid decisions.
Well, that's actually true.
And then he starts going further. And all of a sudden, the closed captioning while Vince is mumbling disappears. And then just one word pops up. Inaudible.
Oh, my God, that's so funny.
It's a pre-tape in an office. These guys, they're mic'd. It's a professional television production. But yet, the closed captioning is reading it as the same thing as a fucking radio message from the space shuttle in outer space, inaudible, or some kind of police surveillance video of the mob, inaudible. So that was poor Austin Theory. God, no.
By the way, we get people that ask us, why does Travis's drawings of current Vince look like he has lipstick on?
Because he looks like he's got lipstick on.
To which I would say, what the hell was going on here? And that side shot of him, he looks completely nuts. He looks like he was built in Jim Henson's fucking Creature studio. He really fucking does. There were Muppets and then there were creatures that Jim Henson would build. He doesn't even look real.
I think if he was silly putty or Play-Doh, don't get him too close to a fucking heat source or he might start melting. But that would, yeah. I mean, I just don't know I just wish, and we talked about this last week on the show, I wish he would just take time off, retire, put his feet up, at least he's not a television personality anymore. And since he was one of the absolute best ever, it's disheartening now that younger people are going to see him now and say, this is the Vince McMahon that we've heard about that was so commanding and, as you mentioned, captivating or whatever. It's sad now, and I hate to see that, and I wish there was somebody that could tell him honestly, or had the balls to, whether he agreed with him or not, that would go to him and say, Vince, you shouldn't be on TV anymore. But nobody's going to do that. And, well, what does Stephanie do anymore in that company? Do we know?
They gave her I think they shifted her position to another position recently. She was chief brand officer for a while, which...
Well, she shifted her position to another position. You mean she went from doggy style to reverse cowgirl?
That's not what I meant in any possible way. I meant she went from, I don't even know if it's senior VP, EVP, but head of this department to just do this now. And she was doing something else, I think. Although it's all basically the same. It's just Stephanie needs a job. Let's keep her doing something. She's good at talking to people who know nothing about wrestling. She's incredible at that. Like, if you knew you had an auditorium filled with people who know nothing about wrestling, send her to talk to them. Best person in the world.
Yes, so you would think she would be the one to talk to Vince and say, Vince, come on. It's, I don't know.
Thank you, Moolah. You have no idea who she is.
Excellent question, Wendy.
All right. Well, let's get another question about Vince here on the show. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mike Paul. With Jim always being one of the most knowledgeable guys in the business, I'm curious if he has any examples of things that he may have learned or absorbed from Vince while working with him. Whether it be on booking, psychology, commentary, anything. We always heard the boys refer to Vince as a genius. And with him feeling like a completely different person now in his later years, I'd be interested in hearing some examples. Another side question to add on top of that, people often said that Vince's genius wasn't in coming up with an idea, it was in making the perfect tweaks to an already existing idea. Any examples of this from Jim?
Oh, God. Well, it may not even have been making the perfect tweaks to an existing idea, although he was good at that, but also just which idea to pick to begin with in a lot of cases, and or more importantly, I mean, when he would swing for the fences on this, he could either pick the absolute best person to do something with, or he would swing for the fences and strike out with trying something with Warrior over and over or whatever, right? I've mentioned some of the things that I learned from Vince as far as television production and formatting. And we talked about keeping a thread with your main event guys throughout the show to keep the people's interest, because they always know that there's something coming up involving somebody they want to see. Vince was great at getting talent over, because he would, if he decided he was going to push them, he would push them to the fucking moon, and he'd push them right. Now, none of this maybe applies to modern day, because I don't know what's going on there these days. But look at who, and in some cases what, Vince was able to get over successfully, even for a short period of time in his company at various points, that you would have thought, holy shit, this ain't never going to work. Because he could, when he picked and decided that he was going to run with a guy, he wouldn't do it halfway. He would give it, not just in putting them over in finishes, but in promos and in every other way. Getting, I know it didn't work, but goddamn, you can't tell me that the Lex Express and the whole Lex Luger push with almost anybody else wouldn't have worked. And it did work with Lex there for a brief period of time. If he'd have won at SummerSlam, they probably got something out of him short term. But that's when he decided he would do something, he would go all the way with it. He wasn't going to give somebody a little push, and he wasn't going to be a little bit pregnant. It was all or nothing. Vince was never good with finishes. Vince, I don't know that I remember Vince ever coming up with a finish to a match. But that's different than who goes over. In those days also, he was focused on, and you can still see, I don't know if it's him now or just people that learned from him, but you can still see that with Roman Reigns. He's not going to do any fucking bullshit jobs like that he would be if he was anybody else on the card and just the regular comedy writers were in charge, because they don't know that winning matters to begin with. But you can still tell at the top of his card with guys like that, he's not going to have guys doing bullshit jobs, even if they have to mow down some of the baby faces. Vince had so much more assuredness to him then. And you talked about him being a captivating TV personality, but when he walked in the room, you knew he was there, and you looked at that guy like, well, fuck. He may be crazy as a rainbow trout in a car wash, but he owns this whole thing, and he's got here for a reason, and he commands respect and deference, and you'll follow this guy, because even if he's leading you over a cliff, he is absolutely goddamn sure that that's the right cliff to go over. It's just a commanding personality that I think they're still all expecting him to have, but he doesn't have it anymore. And the new guys have never seen that Vince, and the new writers have never met that Vince. And now everybody's running like, well, we need to act like it's still like it was in the old days. But meanwhile, Vince isn't the Vince of 20 years ago, and he don't have Pat Patterson. He don't have Jerry Briscoe. He don't have Jim Ross. He don't have Jim Cornette, for whatever that was worth. He don't have Steve Austin and Mankind and The Undertaker and guys that started in the territories that were fucking expert at wrestling and its psychology. And we're going to try to act like we're doing all those things that we did then, but now it's a completely different company, and we're just running off a variety of cliffs in every different direction. It's just different.
Well, Jim, it's now time for It Could Happen to You, where we pick a random question and we read it on the air, and we find out either why it hasn't been read on the air, or maybe it's a good question. We'll see. Right here, this one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John Barraclough, Newcastle, England. Jim, ignoring the myriad reasons why you wouldn't, speaking purely hypothetical, if you were offered obscene amounts of money to assemble and regularly perform with a new Midnight Express
good God,
in WWE or AEW, which two current wrestlers would you choose, and which promotion would you choose to perform in?
Well, John Bearclaw, I wouldn't put together a new Midnight Express, because then they would be compared to the old Midnight Express, and unfortunately, Stan Lane is not in the youthful shape he used to be, and neither is Dennis Condrey, and Bobby's gone. So it would be like New Coke and the new Rolling Stones and, whatever. It wouldn't work. So that's the last thing you do. The last new Midnight Express was not my idea, and this one wouldn't be either. If I was going to put together a tag team or put myself together with a tag team, they would not be called the Midnight Express. Honestly, of existing tag teams, there are two teams that if I was still young enough to do this, interested in traveling, there wasn't a worldwide pandemic going on, and I could afford to take off from what I'm doing now to become a manager again, because I'm making more money now than I ever made as a fucking manager. But if all of those things were happening, then I would manage either FTR or Mark and Jay Briscoe. I don't really know of another tag team in existence in the business right now that I would either enjoy or consider that it was, that I could help them, and or that they were good enough to not spoil my tag team reputation by following, I don't count the new Midnight Express, by following the Midnight Express or the Heavenly Bodies, or even Owen Hart and the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith at that period of time. Honestly, I think the Briscoe brothers in a real wrestling promotion, which that doesn't exist today either, but in any territory, including Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, the Crockett's, or World Class, or Mid-South Wrestling, I think the Briscoes would have drawn you a little bit more money, and I think FTR would have had the best matches with anybody else on the card.
What about a new Stop and Go Express?
Who was that? Bobby Eaton used to be tickled at that. It was Tommy Hagee.
I thought it was Mike Jackson.
I think Mike Jackson and Tommy Hagee. Nick Goulas at one point when one of his attempts to come back and promote wrestling in northern Alabama and somewhere around Nashville. He had a WOW promotion at one point in the late 80s, and George did the interviews for it. But it was all the expresses, rock and roll, midnight, whatever, were hot. So he named Mike Jackson and Tommy Hagee the Stop and Go Express. And it was fucking hilarious to think of them pulling into the goddamn Stop and Go convenience marts. And we're the Stop and Go Express. But anyway.
Do you feel any...
Then let me explain. The reason why I say, because the Briscoes can talk their ass off and they have that look. And you can believe that they're not only dangerous men, but that they're fucking psychopaths and that they will hurt you and that they could potentially go into business for themselves. And they're tremendous athletes, but they're not polished classical workers in the traditional pro wrestling sense. The exact opposite is the FTR. They are traditional, polished pro wrestlers in the classic wrestling sense, and they can have great matches with almost anybody except for the Lucha Brothers, because that's so far afield. But their promos, and even though they're badasses, as we've seen one of Cash's little short right-hand Dick Murdoch jabs at the Hall of Fame ceremony a few years ago.
You talk to anyone who's been around Dax, they'll tell you Dax may be the one to be scared of too, yeah.
Yeah, but they don't look like they're mentally fucking ill like the Briscoes do. But at the same time, it's like the difference between Bruiser Brody and Arn Anderson. Bruiser Brody could come in and draw you big money right off the bat because of his reputation and his look and the way that he got over. But it also became a little tiresome because there wasn't a lot of variety. So he need to come in and out. With FTR, it's like Arn Anderson. He won't draw you $1 million the first night in, but he will steadily get over with the proper push and the proper opponents to show what he can do, to the point where you'll have a top team or a top talent in a position that they can hold for several years, because you don't get tired of seeing them as long as you give them quality opponents and you don't do the same thing over and over. So it's two different types of teams and two different types of draws. But that's who I would manage if I was going to manage again. But I'm not going to manage again, so it's a moot point.
And with Heavenly Bodies, obviously, there was a different Heavenly Bodies years before you. That's where you got the name, so there's probably not the sense of pride and ownership over that one as much.
Well, yeah, but and also, see, that's the thing. You can take an idea, but don't make it a copy. The new Midnight Express was ridiculous because everybody remembered the original Midnight Express, and all respect to Bart Gunn and Bob Holly, they couldn't touch as a tag team either set of the Midnight Express, so it wasn't fair to them. It was fucking... Vince McMahon is the one that called me about it. I have a feeling it was shit-stained trying to stir things up to make all of us look bad. But the Heavenly Bodies was a nickname of Don and Al Green in the early 70s, and there was absolutely no similarity whatsoever between the Heavenly Bodies of either Tom Pritchard and Stan Lane or Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey and Don and Al Green, besides that nickname, which I liked, and it was 20 years after the fact. So even if they'd have trademarked it, the copyright would have been up after 21 years. So that's why we did that. But it didn't conjure up in anybody's mind the thought of the Green Brothers.
Or Tom Pritchard and Pat Rose.
And since that didn't last...
Managed by Sherry Martel, I think.
Tom Pritchard and Pat Rose in 1985, the Heavenly Bodies in Memphis, managed by Sherry Martel. And they got about 6 weeks of a run, and Tom broke his ankle. And there was that.
All right. Well, let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Dave in Colts Neck, New Jersey.
Cold Snack, New Jersey?
Colts Neck, New Jersey.
Oh, I thought you said cold snack. They don't have microwaves up there? I thought at the Wawa they could heat those things up. Go ahead.
Bret Hart, in his book, gave Goldberg a 0 out of 10 on a wrestling scale. I know Goldberg injured Bret, but Goldberg was super over. How could he be a 0? He was believable. He was literally beating guys up. Goldberg also looked like a monster and was the biggest draw in the industry for a bit. I'm referring to his WCW days. Never saw the WWE stuff. How can Bret give him a 0, and what do you think? You took a stiff like Batista and made him a star. What could you have done with Goldberg?
About the same thing. Honestly, about the same thing, and it went about as far as they were both going to go. Here's the thing. I'm not disagreeing with Bret Hart, because if somebody ended my career when I was at the top of my game and making millions of dollars per year because they kicked me in the fucking head, gave me a concussion, I would rate them a 0, if not lower than that. At the same point, looking objectively at things, not having had my career ended by Goldberg, as we referenced earlier in the program, at least he was better than El Gigante. Bless old Jorge, right? He wasn't a 0, but he was very, very close to those low single digits, because that was the thing. You can be the biggest, most overdraw, especially for a short period of time, in the wrestling business or anything else. Remember, Milli Vanilli was the hottest selling act in music at one brief point, one shining moment, with absolutely no talent or content to you. The right place at the right time with the right push, you can do that. And Goldberg looked the part, had the personality, had the aggression, had the size and the athletic ability to pick guys up and slam them down and spear them and pin them and get over. And they had a bunch of people who were honestly more talented than Goldberg was in a wrestling ring, because he was brand new. He's a football player. He'd never been a wrestling fan. Then he goes to the power plant for however long, and he's on national TV. Everybody that was more experienced, more talented, and had a better grip on the performance aspect of wrestling bounced off of him and put him over. And it made him the biggest draw in the business for a short period of time. And that's not a knock on Goldberg. That's a factual recounting of what happened. The only reason he stopped being the biggest draw was when they started monkeying with the record. And then when, of course, they finally broke the streak. Wasn't that when Bobby Heenan said, well, they killed the golden goose here tonight? Because even Goldberg, he was so green, he didn't know why he was over. He thought that the people in charge of him knew more about wrestling than he did. Well, he was right, but they weren't looking out for his best interests. And Hogan picked the time to cut his nuts off in Atlanta there when he could claim that he drew 40,000 people to the Georgia Dome or whatever.
Instead of putting it on pay-per-view.
Instead of putting it on pay-per-view. Because Hogan wanted the TBS executives attending in Atlanta to see 40,000 people there to see allegedly him. And then he just had to beat Goldberg.
Well,
but anyway.
That was the night Goldberg beat him.
Oh, is that? That's
they
right.
They gave it away on free TV.
They gave it away on free TV, the first one. Anyway, point being, once that they started monkeying with the streak, and once that they started monkeying with Goldberg, and the people didn't believe in him anymore or believe in the validity of what he was doing, that didn't do him any favors in WCW, but at least he was a beast. When he came to WWF and they tried to give him personality, that's the reason why not only that some people didn't remember Goldberg fondly, but also why Goldberg got out of the wrestling business for all that time, because he didn't want to be doing that shit. Because at that point, even he knew it was wrong. Then they bring him back 20 years later, and now people have forgotten the goofy WWF Goldberg from 2003 or whatever it was. And they remember fondly the Goldberg of their teenage years that was jackhammered everybody on TBS every week. And he might be a little bit better wrestler now because he's not the young physical specimen he was, but he's had 20 more years to learn and think about this shit and know maybe what to do and what not to do. But he was never trained for a long period of time. He didn't have a long career. He wasn't in love with or enamored of the wrestling business, and so he wasn't in it very long because the places that he could make 7 figures a year went away and or didn't want him anymore. So it's not his fault. It's not my fault, as Gorgeous Jimmy used to say, but that you can still make a guy like that an attraction in the wrestling business. It just can't be all of them. There have to be people that are polished performers that know what they're doing to get. I've said it before. We used to call it stealing a house. Then when pay-per-view came along, it was stealing a pay-per-view. What did the WWF do with Zeus in 1990? What was that one when No Holds Barred came out? 89. Okay. They stole a pay-per-view out of him. Here's this fucking actor that looks like something, but he's never wrestled before. He doesn't know how to wrestle, and he probably doesn't want to wrestle again. But they stole a pay-per-view. What?
The reality is that may be their story. The reality is, as a kid, we didn't give a fuck about Zeus and Hogan. It was all about the Warrior getting his hands on Rick Rude and Heyman. That was the only thing we cared about. It was a hot crowd, and that was the big match. And all summer, when they're promoting that awful movie, and word got out quickly as soon as any of us saw it, that movie was awful.
Yeah.
And then Hogan's feuding with this guy on TV. That was going on, or the Warrior is running after Rick Rude and Haku and Andre the Giant, and meanwhile the Brainbusters are winning the tag titles from Demolition. It was Demolition and the Warrior that excited kids like me and caused us to buy pay-per-views, not Hogan in 89.
Okay, but the push and the main event and the poster and the publicity, and let me tell you a little story. One time I'm on the phone with Rick Rubin, and he was either at his house near in Hollywood, or he had a beach house or whatever. Malibu. But what was, oh goddamn, the rapper from Seattle,
Sir Mix-a-Lot. He's there with Sir Mix-a-Lot, and he mentions the word wrestling, and Rubin actually says Sir Mix-a-Lot wants to talk to you. He likes wrestling. He's been watching wrestling, whatever. He wants to talk to you. So he puts me on the phone with Sir Mix-a-Lot. This was 1992, okay? Yeah. And by the way, that's when he was big. He had Baby's Got Back. That was right around the same time.
Baby Got Back. That's the one I was trying to think of. Yeah, Baby Got Back. And there was another one he had at the time. But anyway, so here's this famous rapper, and he's on the phone with who his record producer friend has told him is a wrestling expert. He can ask any question about professional wrestling. You know what he asked me? Hey, did you ever meet Zeus? I swear to God.
Well, you know what? Did he tell you why he asked that question?
He did not.
Tiny Lister did bodyguard work for a lot of guys also. Did he reveal, like, if he knew Zeus?
No, that's why he was asking me. He loved Zeus. He watched Zeus. He liked No Holds Barred. This is not a dedicated wrestling fan like you were. This is some guy just, there's Zeus and Hulk Hogan. But the point, they tried to, whether or not it was the focal point of the pay-per-view, they tried to steal a pay-per-view with Zeus. They did that in the old days with a house show in the territories when you'd have a freak of nature that was traveling around. In the old days, it was Martin the Blimp Levy, who was 600 pounds or whatever, or the Swedish Angel or the French Angel, Maurice Tillet, or all the angels that Jack Pfeffer came up with. They couldn't work you could get a veteran to bump off of him and work around him, but because of the look and the publicity and the way that the match could be marketed, you could get in and get out and steal a house before the people got smartened up to the fact that who they paid to see was the shits. You could cover it up maybe in one match. Maybe you could even bring it back in a rematch and cover it up again. But sooner or later, they're going to see through it. The classic example we've talked about, in 1975, the Mid-South Coliseum sold out 3 weeks in a row, with the main event being the Mongolian Stomper versus the Magnificent Zulu for the Southern Heavyweight title. Zulu never drew 15 cents in Chinese money anywhere. He had the Mr. Universe body, 6'7", 275 pounds, like a 28-inch waist, and he's a black babyface in Memphis, which they loved, but he was fucking rotten. But what they did was, on the underneath card, they put Jackie, Don, and Roughhouse Fargo reuniting in a 6-man tag in Memphis for the first time in 10 or 15 years. And they put Zulu on top in the title match, and they did 3 weeks worth of sellouts. They stole houses with Zulu, and then the following week he was gone. Because when you'd seen Zulu 3 times, you were already way past tired of him. Meanwhile, in Louisville, he was in a second preliminary match because our audience wasn't as heavily African-American, and they couldn't steal a fucking main event with him because the people had already seen him wrestle to begin with. So the point of the statement is, with Goldberg or anybody else, there's a place for all of those people if they're respectful of the business and try to take it halfway seriously. It's promotion. Vince always had a saying, he liked to sell the sizzle, not the steak. Well, the sizzle is what sells, but I always like to have a nice tasting steak because that way, next time you smell that sizzle, you believe your nose rather than thinking, I ain't going to get fooled again with that dog meat they served me just because it smelled good.
Well, you know, Jim, perhaps Bret would feel better about the whole thing if he had just hired a lawyer.
Or perhaps that all the wrestling fans could have got together and fired up a class action suit for Vince McMahon trying to pass Zeus off as a wrestler. That's what you meant to say, wasn't it there, fella? Well, anyway, regardless, if you need a lawyer for Christmas, if you want to sue Santa Claus for damaging your chimney on the way down, if the sleigh left marks on your roof and now you've got to call an insurance company, if the reindeer shit in the front yard and your kids ate it and developed some type of septic shock from reindeer shit, whatever the case may be, I know who you can call in the holiday season.
Call Stephen P. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Still to the rest.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we must at all costs protect our children from eating reindeer shit from flying reindeer, because that will poison them. And as well, I understand that Santa, his sleigh is still running on fossil fuel, and that could be polluting the environment. So, folks, this Christmas, if you're sitting around and looking at a yard full of reindeer shit, if you're looking out the window and your air is polluted because Santa's sleigh left a lot of residual carbon monoxide, look no further than the finest attorney in not only the great state of West Virginia, who's going to dump Joe Manchin anytime soon now, but also the entire world. Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. You want to be jolly in the holidays? Well, you're going to be jolly as a fucking drunk Santa when Stephen P. New gets you paid for the damage and the harm and the injury and the inconvenience that has come with whatever your problem is that has been inflicted upon you by a major corporation, a large entity, or a greedy, avaricious billionaire running a business Stephen P. New is the champion of the little guy, and if you've been personally injured, he'll get you personally paid. Again, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, and just drop him a Christmas card for the holidays, because Stephen is a heck of a guy that comes down everybody's chimney and spreads joy and laughter and merriment and mirth making throughout the holiday season. He's like a little West Virginia version of an elf that just sits on your shelf and smiles at you with those rosy cheeks.
You mean the elf on the shelf?
The elf on the shelf.
An elf that sits on a shelf. Otherwise known as the elf on the shelf.
He's a new for you. He's a new for you instead of an elf on a shelf. And as I said, he's got the rosy cheeks. I thought that came from the heartbreak of psoriasis. I was wrong. He's just happy. And he's got good blood circulation. But he will fix you up. And we're going to get some more information on some of these shady arbitration clauses that these big companies are putting in these contracts, because that has a wrestling connection. We're finding out some of these wrestling companies are putting these shady arbitration clauses in their contracts also to make sure when they fuck you, then you can't do anything about it unless you want to plead your case to their Aunt Ethel. That's who's in charge of the arbitration. Stuff like that. So anyway, if you want the lowdown on legal issues and how not to be entangled in them and how to get what's rightfully yours, get what's coming to you with Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com.
And happy birthday. You just celebrated the big 5-0.
That's right. Instead of Hawaii 5-0, it's West Virginia 5-0.
I believe that's double the life expectancy in West Virginia.
And triple the number of teeth. So we got that. And we josh and we fun. But Stephen knows he's a diamond and a turd out there. He knows that he's like me in Kentucky. He's surrounded by a sea of imbecilicness, but he is yet a voice of progressiveness.
That's right. But let's get going with the rest of the show, Jim. Before we wrap things up, a few more questions. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Clayton in Northern California. I love the podcast. They make my work day, I assume he meant, my work day much more enjoyable. It says my word day. It makes my word day much more enjoyable.
Well, there's a day every week where he learns a new word, and some of the words that we use are new to him.
My question for Jim, shut up, Swami! Who would be on your Mount Rushmore of people who have harmed the wrestling business?
Oh, good Lord. I don't know whether that should be a Mount Rushmore or a Sgt. Pepper album cover. You can't just pick. I mean, Shitstain did irreparable damage. Even though Vince McMahon's been so successful, we must indict him, and rightfully so, for fucking up the territory system. There's go ahead.
I was going to say, we said a lot of good things. We're talking most influential, not just someone who's done something bad, but it's about a bad influence.
Yeah, people. A lot of people have done bad things in a barn in front of 12 people that you've never heard of, but we're talking that have had lasting consequences.
I hate to say it, but Paul Heyman.
I was about to say, we referred to it earlier in this program. Heyman has to live with the garbage wrestling that he fostered from ECW. And all the real ECW fans, the real hard cases, are always like, well, but we had the Malenkos and the Guerreros too. Yeah, and that was always in the main event rather than the fucking body surfing, table crashing, barbed wire wrapping, fucking whatever. Sure it was. Heyman has to bear quite a bit of responsibility for that. Jim Herd. Vince McMahon won the wrestling war because of Jim Herd. Vince was completely uncontested as far as any opposition or any meaningful competition from the time that Turner Broadcasting bought the company on November 1st, 1988 until into 1995. He got a 7-year head start. They never made a fucking penny, and Herd was there for the first 3.5 years, ran off most of the talent, changed the salary structure, killed their efforts to get WWF talent when he fucked Tully Blanchard. So you've got Jim Herd basically is the reason why that Vince McMahon, he might have won anyway, but he certainly wouldn't have won that quick. You know, the TBS got handed Crockett Promotions that had just drawn a sold-out Richmond, Virginia, 12,000 people, and was doing big crowds in Philly and Baltimore and Chicago, etc. And in 6 months, they couldn't draw anywhere. And it continued that way. So Herd, Shitstain, Paul Lee, for all the good he did some bad. Vince killed the territories with his expansion machinations. You can't even really blame anybody like a Tony Khan or anybody now with all the hogwash and, you know, because wrestling has been so goofy and watered down for so long that you can't blame any of the modern people. They're just going by what they've seen before. But the root of it came all in the late 80s and into the 90s.
All right, so who was your Mount Rushmore?
I'd have to say Herd, Heyman, Vince, and Shitstain. For influence. I mean, there have been a lot of people that done. I mean, you couldn't put him on Mount Rushmore. You might put him on the ass end of a molehill, but some fat fuck like Ian Rotten that did the garbage death matches for so long, they almost killed wrestling here in Kentucky, but nobody in fucking Iowa or Nebraska or Virginia or, you know, Maine or wherever else even knows that the guy exists. So you can't really elevate them to a Mount Rushmore position of, well, if this guy just hadn't done this, the wrestling business would have been better off. So we lost the territories because of Vince McMahon. Southern style and or legitimate professional wrestling, as I like to call it, lost to sports entertainment because of Jim Herd. Shitstain fucked everything up to the point where we've never recovered after all the hot shotting. And then there's Paul Lee, just because I don't think the furniture and the garbage would have taken hold without ECW.
Jim, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Chris in Liverpool, England. I was watching some early 80s Memphis, and there was a handicap match. Adrian Street, Miss Linda, and your good self versus Bill Dundee and Jerry Calhoun.
Oh, yes.
Just wanted to know how that match came about, as I didn't see any of the TV leading up to it. The copy I watched was about 6th generation, but it looked like Dundee caught you with a beauty of a punch, tagged Calhoun in, and then got you with another 2 haymakers. The finish was the superstar body slamming you, putting Miss Linda on top of you, and then pinning both of you while slapping her backside.
While spanking her ass. And by the way, when Thomas Marlin one time called the finish in Nashville because the locker rooms were separate, so we couldn't talk to the baby faces. So Thomas Marlin comes over and says to Miss Linda, says, yeah, Dundee's he's gonna pin Cornette and he's gonna turn around and spank your fanny. And they'd first not been in the country for a long time, and apparently the word fanny has a significantly different location in England than it does. It's not your ass in England on a woman. Your fanny is a little bit further toward the front and in between your legs. And as soon as Thomas Marlin said he's going to spank your fanny, Adrian's eyes popped open, as did Linda's. He's going to what? But anyway, yes, that was Dundee was working a program with Adrian Street. Adrian's valet obviously was Linda. They gave him to me to manage him. And since Dundee was the booker, and he was also the only one in the Memphis territory that could really work with Adrian, because Adrian had just been in the United States, in Los Angeles, and then came to Memphis. And so he'd only been here a year or two, and almost his entire frame of reference was World of Sport style and English, European style wrestling. And Dundee could do that. And nobody else could at the time in the territory. So Adrian's matches with other people were not particularly good because it was a style clash. But with Dundee, they were great, and the people got into it. And plus, obviously, Dundee was top babyface. But what had happened was The previous week, Dundee, I mean, we worked with Dundee in some fashion or form or combination 10 or 12 weeks in a row. But previously, Calhoun had been the referee in Memphis. This match didn't happen, thankfully, anywhere but Memphis, because that's Calhoun lived there. He didn't work the whole territory. He had another job. But we had done a finish and got some heat on Dundee afterwards, and Calhoun had tried to break it up because he was the referee, and so we'd roughed him up too. So the following week came out on TV, and Dundee said, I want them all three in the ring where I can keep an eye on them, and Jerry Calhoun's going to get a chance to get even with that Cornette and that Miss Linda too. And talk about Dundee catching me with some haymakers. They were stiff. I was Dundee's working punch. So at one time, I wasn't wrestling. It was just after a match, and we're getting heat, and Dundee comes in. He grabs me by the tie and punched me so hard in the face, I couldn't figure out which way to fall down. And he said, are you okay? And I said, yeah. And he hit me harder. And so though he grabbed me, pickled me once to soften me up, and then he tags Calhoun. But Calhoun, if that wasn't his first ever wrestling match, it was close to it. And it was probably my third or fourth at the same time anyway. But Calhoun, not only had nobody ever taught him how to work, but since Calhoun, he was Lawler's brother-in-law. He was Paula's Lawler's brother. And not only had nobody ever taught him how to work, but Jerry he'd been maybe a lifelong wrestling fan because he was in Memphis, but he didn't know how this shit worked at all and had never studied anything. So when I had my first couple of matches, I could still drop an elbow because almost anybody can do that. And I could kick and kind of punch, but he didn't know how to work anything. So Dundee told us as soon as Calhoun comes in, he's going to get on top of you and he's going to be kicking the shit out of you. And Miss Linda come and pull Calhoun off of him. And Cornette, you get on Calhoun, and Calhoun, you turn it over, you come by, and then Miss Linda pulls him off again. And finally, the third time, Dundee will come in and give it a big pop by scoop slamming Miss Linda, which brought the fucking house down. But when Calhoun got on top of me, he tackled me by the waist and took me down, and there was no working at all. And I'm trying to get out from under him, and he's stiff. He's got his fucking forearm across my fucking Adam's apple, trying to hold me down. There's no working at all here. So finally, Linda pulls him off, so I get up and fucking turn him over and drop an elbow on him and start trying to work a few punches, and he immediately turns over and gets back on me again. He's kicking the shit out of me. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm just covering up, waiting for Linda to save me. But that's what led to the people believing these matches, because obviously none of this was set up ahead of time. And it looked like we were really fighting because, goddamn, I was doing my best to get out from under him. And he was doing his best to stay on top of me. So it didn't look like, like we were trying to shoot each other off, one tackle, drop down, hip toss, whatever. Is like the referee's having a fight with the manager. The girl's tougher than either one of them, but Dundee's going to kick that fucking Adrian Street's ass because he's a queer. That was the thing. And it looked like a bunch of people having a fucking fight. But now, if you'd had the girl and the manager and the referee and whatever, they'd all been trying to do goddamn wrestling and execute spots and have the best possible match they could have. Calhoun's first one in the wrestling business got juice on me. Because by the time he got off of me, I had a nosebleed. I don't know from what. So that added to it also, because they're like, Cornette's bleeding. And then we had the 3-on-1 handicap match where Dundee threw me out of the ring as it was a lumberjack match and laid my fucking cheek open. I took 20-something stitches. I really bled that night. But there was, that's why it was. That's what those matches look like, is a bunch of people fucking scrapping with each other. And the people enjoyed it because we weren't trying to obviously do shit we didn't know how to do. There you have it.
All right, Jim, this next question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jimmy. in Birmingham, England.
Slippin' Jimmy?
I don't know about Slippin' Jimmy, but Jimmy sent this question in. Do you know if there's any truth to the story that Vern Gagne asked the Iron Sheik to break Hulk Hogan's leg in their match in the 1980s? And if it were true, do you think that pro wrestling would be a lot different today if the Iron Sheik had stopped Hulkamania before it started?
Well, first question first. Have we established that the offer was made, but that nobody ever actually saw the money?
Oh, I didn't think that was a dispute. Yeah.
Yeah. So the offer, yes, that proposition was made. Nobody ever saw the money. Considering it was Vern, I'm not sure whether he actually would have gone through with it. And I guess if somebody had found out, because Sheik might have spilled his guts, then Vern would have needed the $100,000 for an attorney. But yeah, I mean, Vern got in the business when either things were still being handled in somewhat that fashion, or the people who used to handle things in that type of fashion in the 30s and 40s were still involved in the business. So that's what his frame of reference was and how he grew up. And he figured, this guy's going to fuck with my business, and this guy's going to, Vince McMahon is going to expand and spread into all of our territories. It's going to upset the apple cart in the wrestling business. So what had always been the remedy in that case? You find a shooter and either pull a double cross or hurt the fucking guy. It was just a little more, I won't say unheard of, but not done as much, and or didn't go as far as it would have if it'd been 1954 instead of 1984, because Sheik probably figured, oh, fuck, if I do that, Vince never pay me again, and I want to work there, because he'd worked there before.
Yeah, he made the best move. He went right to Vince Sr. and Jr. and told them, and he was taken care of for a few years until they had to fire him.
Yeah, and he was there from what, 84 to...
He was there from 84
91.
No, he was there from 84 to 87. Then he was fired. They brought him back.
That's right.
Briefly, he was fired again in 88. Then he went to WCW or NWA in 1989. Yeah. And he made some appearances, and then you would have thought he was fired, but no. He was actually at home waiting for his renewal. Then he got fired.
That's right, because when Vince was done with him and didn't want to put up with it anymore, George Scott, because he was big for George Scott in the 70s in the Carolinas, George Scott was not aware of apparently that there had been a thing invented called cocaine, and brought Sheik in to WCW, and they signed him to a 1-year contract for $100,000 a year that would automatically renew for another year unless he was given notice at the end of the term.
I think it may have been more than 100,000.
90 days beforehand. No, it was $100,000. I remember it was $100,000. $100,000, because that's at the period, even though they fired George Scott after 3 months, not even 3 months, because he was an idiot. He fucked everything up. And they were still trying to use Sheik, but by that point, Sheik was so bad in the ring, he couldn't hang with the NWA guys. So they sent him home, but they had to keep paying him. And this was the era that Jim Herd was in charge. And Jim Herd, every time he wanted to either get rid of somebody or pay them less money, he would make sure to Federal Express their contract termination within plenty of time for the clause of the contract. In other words, if you needed to be given notice 90 days before the contract was up or it would renew, you would get your notice by Federal Express that you had to sign for 92 days ahead of time, right? I got mine. Bobby Eaton got his. Stan Lane got his. All the top talent he was always trying to fuck with. But when they sent the Iron Sheik home, everybody forgot about him, and nobody remembered to send him his goddamn termination. So the contract rolled over for a second year. And at that point, that was when Flair had,
I can tell you what happened.
Well, wait a minute. George Scott came in early 89, so the Sheik's contract was up in early 90. Ole had taken over from Flair. So Ole brings Sheik back trying to run him off by making him do jobs on TV in just a few minutes to everybody. But what he didn't count on was that not only was Sheik willing to do for $100,000 a year guaranteed jobs for anybody because he didn't give a fuck, because he knew that Vince didn't want him anymore, and where else is he going to make $100,000? But the jobs were so bad that they didn't want to show him on TV because it was hurting the talent they were trying to push. So they sent the Sheik back home for another year and paid him another $100,000.
Then it gets good, because then Vince didn't want him, obviously. Then the Iraq war breaks out and Vince wants him and makes him an Iraqi, Colonel Mustafa. And then he gets fired again.
If they had not started the Gulf War, Sheik would have disappeared after that WCW run, but he comes back into the SummerSlam angle because of the Gulf War. Even though it was the wrong country.
Jim, a couple more questions and then we wrap things up.
No, you can't mean it.
This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from J.S. Gray. If Jim was in a position to do so, what would be the first one-for-one trade he would make between AEW and WWE? It's an interesting question, because we've never had, baseball or any sport, you could trade players. Because wrestling promoters typically hate each other, you don't get a lot of that. Every now and then, Memphis, Mid-South, you get a trade. But if AEW and WWE are able to say, you know what, maybe there's something that could be mutually beneficial to both of us, a win-win, what would it be?
I'll tell you what. If I was Tony Khan, I would give Vince McMahon anybody for Paul Heyman. Because Tony has plenty of wrestlers. Some of them are even good. And a lot of Vince's wrestlers, as we just talked about on one of the shows, if you put them in Tony's environment, they may not be as over as they are in Vince's, because it's a little bit different stylistically, and the fan base takes everybody different. But if I was Tony, I wouldn't give away CM Punk or Bryan Danielson right now. But if I was Tony, I would say, Vince, you can have anybody else, just like Watts did to Jarrett. And Jarrett did to Watts, said you can have anybody but Junkyard Dog, and Jerry Jarrett said you can have anybody but Jerry Lawler. I would say, Vince, you can have anybody I got except for Punk and Danielson. Give me fucking Heyman. Because what he's got, not only do I not have and can't get anywhere else, nobody else has got it. That still feels like being associated with the wrestling business. But then he'd have to worry that Paul Lee in the next 18 months would take the fucking company away from him, because now you're a fucking local yokel working at the fucking Main Street Kmart, and you're dealing with an international yacht broker from Toulon, France. Paul would probably end up Shad Khan would adopt Paul, and fucking Tony would become an emancipated minor in 18 months. I get no.
Well, seriously,
except for the danger that Paul Heyman would take over the entire company. The one thing that Tony Khan needs above any other wrestlers is Heyman's brain.
So you see it as more a behind-the-scenes role than an on-camera role?
Well, everything. On camera, off camera. If Paul Heyman is still so interested in either making a large amount of money or is doing this for the love of the game, that he goes to these WWF shows every fucking week, that he flies to Saudi fucking Arabia, then certainly one would think that if you said, okay, Paul, come in here and just figure out what's wrong and fix everything. He's the closest one I can think of to a wrestling doctor that would still give a shit and would want to come in there and fix some stuff.
Okay, so if that's what you think AEW's ask should be, looking at it from the WWE perspective, not just what they would demand, but what could they really use? What would they want? Who would they want from the AEW roster for Heyman?
Well, they would have to ask for some of their property back, I guess. because they've had anybody worth a shit. Practically, they've had them, except for then do you go for a pick that you is not going to make a difference now, but will make a difference down the road? Then you enter into the MJFs or the fucking maybe a powerhouse Hobbs or somebody, but that's a long shot. Punk would be a benefit to their program, but he don't want to be there, and they don't want him because he don't want to be there. Danielson was just there and left on purpose because they didn't want to let him do what he wanted to do. So for Vince to get somebody from AEW, it would have to be one of the young guys that they believe, and it wouldn't be Darby Allin because he would never fit the WWF.
Let me propose a trade. I'm going to do it baseball style where I add in different things, all right?
Okay.
The WWE will be offering Paul Heyman and Braun Breaker.
Oh!
In exchange, AEW. Now tell me where you think it's unfair. Powerhouse Hobbs, Dante Martin, Sammy Guevara, and Britt Baker. Would you do that if you were either side?
Oh, in AEW, in a heartbeat, I would do that. To get Braun Breaker and Paul Heyman for, let's say, 4 nice young talents that none of them are ever going to be in the main event at WrestleMania. Who'd you just mention?
I said, and I wrote Paige originally, but I took Paige off. I wrote Sammy and Britt, Dante and Hobbs.
You would be getting
a future.
But at the same time, you would be getting guys that would be excellent in the future, and only one of them probably would ever main event WrestleMania, versus 2 guys that one in the ring and one behind the scenes could really fucking make a difference with your opposition right now. So that'd kind of be like when Bill Watts got the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, myself, Terry Taylor, and Bill Dundee, and Jerry Jarrett got Rick Rude before he knew what the fuck he was doing, Hacksaw Larry Higgins, and Masayo Ito.
Would you do Heyman for Cody?
Oh, good God, in a heartbeat. But see, here's the thing.
If you were WWE, would you do it? If you were WWE,
if I was WWE, no.
Like, do they appreciate the genius of Heyman? You're going under the assumption Tony Khan will appreciate what Heyman, and I think he would. Tony Khan would appreciate what Paul Heyman would bring to the table.
Yeah, but right now, if you've said, okay, you can have Cody back, Vince, but instead, you got to give up Heyman, he's like, well, then who's going to fucking make sure that Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar don't do anything stupid? Paul Heyman. If I lose him, if I'm going to put fucking Cody in there to produce Lesnar and Roman?
Okay, let's take Heyman out of it then. Let's talk about wrestlers. And I threw Braun Breaker in there just to have a conversation piece, but it could be anyone. Is there anyone NXT or main roster that would be a perfect fit for AEW? And likewise, there's a good equal trade back.
Oh,
either
goddamn,
with someone of stature or younger talent.
That's not fair because I have all 175 roster talents in the WWE that they haven't fired yet memorized. So, of course, somebody's going to say, well, you fucking idiot, you didn't say so-and-so. But it's not an easy call off the top of my head to think of one, no.
Would you do Austin Theory for Sammy Guevara?
Yes. In a heartbeat.
Both sides? You think WWE would want Sammy Guevara?
No.
That's what I'm saying. It has to be a win-win, one that really makes sense for both sides.
Saying. Again, WWE would look at, wait a minute. Sammy Guevara does the big dives, but Austin Theory is several inches taller and 20 or 30 pounds heavier and is probably the same age, but has a more solid upside in our company because Sammy Guevara would never main event WrestleMania. But meanwhile, if Austin Theory goes to AEW, he doesn't have as many veterans like the Danielsons that he could work with and show that he's a prodigy and does all the little things correctly and the stuff you can't teach, because he'd be in there with a bunch of flippy, floppy, slippy flying guys like Sammy is, and Sammy can do that shit, and Austin Theory can't. So Austin Theory, one of these days, should main event WrestleMania. Sammy Guevara never will because of size and style. So it would be a good trade for AEW, but not. That's why I'm saying, and honestly, because of the differences in both promotions, You can say what would be better for their in-ring product and what would the guys learn more from, or what would draw more money right now and in the foreseeable future. And some of the WWE guys wouldn't translate, and most of the AEW guys wouldn't translate. The ones that the AEW guys that would translate to the WWE are the ones that have already been there. And then you got a guy like MJF that can do anything.
Maybe we'll revisit this again in the future, but Jim, it's time for our final question this week on the Drive-Thru. An off-topic question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John Fell in Baltimore. When you first started reading comics, what was it about Marvel that appealed to you more than DC? I know you read both, or read both, but when you talk about your favorites, you lean towards the house of ideas.
Yes.
Also, if the original Avengers, Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, and Wasp, fought the original Justice League, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, I don't know who this is, John Jones,
the Martian Manhunter.
The Martian Manhunter. I'm more of a Marvel person too. Who would win?
The Avengers. Especially the original Avengers. You had some heavy hit. Who's gonna kick the shit out of Thor, Captain America, the Hulk, Giant Man? I didn't like Ant-Man. I like Giant Man. Iron Man. The reason I like Marvel, and honestly, it was my first, because I had read, obviously, kids' comic books. And Casper, the Friendly Ghost, Richie Rich, Little Lotta. Archie comics, stuff like that. The Harvey comics, the Archie the kids comics.
Baby Huey?
Baby Huey was a bit, and I loved the entire Duck family, and Scrooge McDuck was my favorite. I always wanted to go to the money bin. But when I got my first grown-up comics, I've told this story. I just turned 6. And we were up at my Aunt Lola's for Thanksgiving, and I was bored and didn't have anything to do. And Aunt Lola said, well, Richard and Larry, my cousins who were 12 years older than me, have some funny books in the basement. And went and got the box, and there on top was Avengers #1 and Avengers #4 and Journey into Mystery 83. Several of these books, this was 1967. I just sold them 4 or 5 years ago for considerably more than I paid, because it was like 200 comic books. And my dad was still alive at the time. He said, well, you can't just have them. You have to give them your allowance. So I get 50 cents for that box of books. Avengers 1 and 4, Journey into Mystery 83, and a couple of hundred other early Marvels. And that's what I loved, especially the Fantastic Four. I liked the Hulk. I was into Spider-Man, liked Thor okay. Iron Man was all right.
You never tried to draw?
Yes, and I'm not good at it. But I did try to draw the superheroes, and it didn't work out. But and then there was a few Superman comics and a couple of Batmans. I actually always liked Batman a little bit better than Superman, because to me, as I've said this before, DC was always the WWF and Marvel was the NWA. Marvel was just a little more believable, a little more realistic, a little grittier. They were in a real city, New York, not Metropolis or Gotham City, whatever. And I just started with them, and I liked their characters and their gimmicks better. And I thought it was more, this was before I'd ever even seen wrestling. I've just always liked things that had a little bit more real to them, so that when you take the right turn into fantasy land, and okay, I'll buy this because you've set me up a nice little base here, a nice little foundation. I can believe it. Gamma rays, who knows what they might do to people, right? But sending your baby son from the planet Krypton in a rocket wrapped in blankets that Pa and Ma Kent are able to make into a Superman costume. Well, if the fucking material is impervious and invulnerable, how'd you sew the shit? See, I was still thinking of that when I was 8. But anyway, so that's why I like Marvel better than DC.
All right.
Thank you, John. Merry Christmas, John Fell, you and your whole clumsy family.
Well, with that, the drive-thru is closed. All right. And I put it down lightly today. We thank you, and before we wrap things up, Merry Christmas to everyone. I'm sure this will be the last show that we release before Christmas. Merry Christmas to everyone. We hope everyone is spending time with family or people they like or just people who aren't sick. And we hope everyone, well, I don't know what I'm saying. Just don't die, everyone.
Just stay alive.
Just stay alive.
Week.
But thank you. Thank you for the tremendous year we've had here on my show, the Drive Thru, the very, very popular Drive Thru, each and every week, Jim. But as we wrap things up, I want to remind you, the Jim Cornette Experience will not be debuting this week, but we will have an omnibus this weekend. Wherever you find your favorite podcast in the usual Jim Cornette Experience feed, a brand new omnibus this weekend, and don't forget, a new drive-thru next week. Right here, wherever you find your favorite podcast, on whatever day we decide to actually produce this thing and release it. You can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget about Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com. Well, forget about it until next year, and then remember once again about Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com, available at JimCornette.com.
That's where it's available.
Of course, to access the archive of the Drive-Thru and Experience, become a patron today. Patreon.com/Cornette. For $5 a month, you get access to the archive. And actually, we are putting up today a version of the Cult of Meat with Extra Cheese without laughter, without anything in the background. For those of you who have been trying to find a way to cut it up for your song submissions, this will be your best chance on Patreon. Patreon.com/Cornette. Of course, subscribe to the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette. It'll be the very first thing that pops up. Full episodes, clips of episodes, and omnibus collections, all with the very, very popular exclusive Travis Heckel artwork. If there's something you hear on this show that you enjoy and you want to share,
it's a complete accident.
Or you want to post on social media, go to the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. But Jim, don't want to forget, of course, the Drive-Thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with the birthday boy at newlawoffice.com. But as we close out this week, Jim, any final notes for the listeners?
Happy New Year! Or Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
That's first. Yes. Merry Christmas, then Happy New Year.
That's right. But until next time, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!